It's Fun Day Sunday, everyone. Right here, where I am, when I am. This episode will probably come out on a Sunday because I one thing I'm not proud of much when it comes to this production. The production being Breaking Change. That's the name of the podcast that you stumbled into just now. I like to imagine like podcasts are like an alley of CD bars, you know, like tiny, like 6-seater bars. And, you're just trying to find a place to fill your ear holes so that the voice in your head doesn't take over. Cause that's how I listen to podcasts. And so you just, you open one door, it's, oh, that's full, right? That podcast is, they've got their audience already. And so you keep on opening doors and you go into one and you realize it's just you and the bartender and they're kind of awkward, right? So you walk out, you go back in the alley and you come keep checking. And so I like to think that anyone listening to this thing is just, they're trying me out. They don't really know what this shtick is. So I feel like I got to explain it every time. But a little bit behind the magic. Here we are in version 15 of the podcast. And I finally figured out, even though I owned a Stream Deck, this is an Elgato device. You've probably seen it if you've ever. It is one of a constellation of products that has emerged in the era of mommy, I want to be a streamer someday. Where prosumer products for people who are wannabe Twitch people or YouTubers. And it's kind of like, it's a sample board, but it's got configurable buttons that can show graphics, and you can basically automate anything on a computer. And I had been using these to run little AI snippets, like a command line GPT-4 thing where I could play, hey, punch up this language or summarize this sentence, and I'd click it. I just wasn't using it enough. So instead, now what I'm doing finally is putting it to work to help produce this podcast. So I've got a button for an intro, outro, and I figured out how to loop back. Actually, I wrote a blog post about this, how to loop back the audio from the solid state Logic 2 Plus interface. So this is really some behind the magic stuff. That's the thing that my microphone, which has a traditional XLR microphone cable, it plugs into that, and then that plugs into the computer via USB-C. I wanted loopback because I wanted to be able to just click a button, like here I did on my Stream Deck, and I played that intro music. This is the first episode where I just played the intro music, and I heard it the same time you did. And I didn't have to edit it in post. Although I will say in every previous episode, I did play the music anyway, just to kind of hype myself up. And then I would dive in, and then I would just, the template would just already have the file there. But this makes it feel more like this is live. And also I get to push a button, and who doesn't love pushing buttons? It's not so sophisticated that like if I were to press it now, it would play, but I'm not confident that it would stop playing if I clicked it again. And I don't know if we need another 30 seconds of this. So anyway, yeah, thanks for stumbling into my humble podcast abode. I guess all the drinks are free. So listen all you want. Version 15. This episode's Breaking Change. The reason that we're here is to discuss an e-ink iPod Touch, which I'll explain what that means a little bit later on. But it's pretty cool. It's all new. It's new to me, so I look forward to sharing some of those experiences. It's been I wouldn't say it's been a light news weeks. But there's just not a lot in the news I feel like talking about. So hopefully we'll have a chance to get to a little bit more mailbag stuff. Maybe it'll be less than 2 hours. Some of you would like that, but the real believers would be bummed to see a mere 1 hour, 47 minute time. Oh, now I've said a specific number. Maybe I'll try to hit that. We'll see. I'm not necessarily very good at calling my shots here, though. Time management has never been a gift of mine. And like when I'm giving a presentation on stage, I know that I can just talk for a long time. And I also know that when I'm allowed to just talk, you get this, right? You don't get a tightly produced, polished, awesome bit of rhetoric that has a point. You get real-time brainwaves out of my mouth hole, and that's got its place. But when people are attending, especially a professional conference, and they want to learn something, I want to value their time. Unlike your time is as valuable to me as you are paying for this podcast. So we're just all here to divest ourselves of our a little sliver of our existence by spending some time together. But when you're at a conference, I want to, people are spending money, they're traveling. I assume that their time is valuable. And so I work backwards from how many minutes do I have? Okay, I got 40 minutes. I got 30 minutes. Oh, there's it's actually 30 minutes, but 5 are reserved for questions, but I'm not going to take questions. So I've got 30 minutes. And then I will, not to say I designed the talk around how much time I have, but once I've got most of what I want to say in slides and it exists, then I will just practice and practice and practice, always against the timer. And it becomes less about the primary focus. If I let that be the time constraint, then I can, how to put this? It lets my brain, my asynchronous brain, sort of just flow with the content in a way that if all I was thinking about was giving the perfect speech, I'd probably get in my own head. But if my procedural and kind of obsessive analytical brain is focused on nailing the timing, nailing the transitions between slides, nailing the amount of time spent on each little topic, and then ultimately, like I said, calling the shot and landing at exactly 29 minutes and 57 seconds, and then doing it multiple times in rehearsal so that I'm confident when I go on stage I can land the plane. Then the words that I actually say end up being a little bit more like relaxed and laid back. Whereas if I was just practicing a script, or if I had plenty of extra time after, or what, if I wasn't thinking about the time, I think I'd be even more anxious and even more precious, I guess, about the particular language that I'd use. Whereas, at least for me, that would never be my best content. It would feel too forced. And then, of course, delivering that on stage would be difficult because I'd be picking out fancier words and so on and so forth. All right. I've got a long list still of stories from my recent trip to Japan. One of them stood out to me today. So I was in Okinawa with Becky, and I think she was out of the room, or she was doing something else, and she came back and she walked in on me watching Cops in Japan. Cops, it goes by another name. It's, you know what I mean. Cops, well, I guess you don't. If you're in the US, you probably do. A TV show called Cops was, I don't know if it's still running. It's a, depending on where you sit on the political spectrum, it is problematic for one reason or another. But it's a show where they follow police officers in a documentary style, and they go from case to case, and case is the wrong word, call to call, right? Like they're following them in a squad car, and they're like, let's see what happens. And then they record everything, and then some dude sits in an audio booth and tries to like spike up the drama to the situation. And the thing about Cops that made it so appealing in the US to audiences was whether you look at this as like playing into the fears of urban crime or any of the like racially loaded stereotypes around that, or whether it was just the raw excitement of seeing people running away from cops and the cops catching up to them or not catching up to them, and the suspense and the thrill. Well, there's a cops equivalent show in Japan, and it came on, and I'd seen it before, and it's presented in the same way with kind of like the dark color grading and the extremely dramatic. You won't wait till what's next? What's behind that curtain? What you won't believe what they're hiding in this car. Boom, commercial break kind of thing. I'd never sat to watch it though, and as soon as I did, I was thinking, but police officers in Japan are not like police officers in many other countries. Like, and they explained this to me when I was in college. They're like, here, we're going to learn some vocab. The word for police is keisatsu. They work out of, instead of these big scary police stations with prison cells, they work out of what are called koban, or police boxes. And they're smaller. They're kind of, I don't know, they're the size of like a toll booth sometimes, or a parking gate. They're not typically very large. They have a counter, and if you go up and like their primary use, 90% of what they do is they help people who are lost or who lost a thing, or have some sort of very, very community-ish, like a low stakes problem. And this is a public servant who is just there and accessible to help out. Whereas like I wouldn't go to the city hall necessarily to tell them about my cat is missing, or I don't know exactly how to get to the station from here because I'm unfamiliar with this town. But if I saw a koban, I could walk in and I could just ask that. And there's not the idea that like cops' primary purpose in Japan would be to find crime and arrest people is so antithetical to just how it's all set up, from how they interface with the public and so forth to, and it's, one can say it's like, well, it's because it's such a safe country, but there's like a chicken and egg element. Like when American cities talk about how community policing has been really effective, like in Boston is bragging about how they've brought violent crime way down by having police officers work and live in the community and engage. There's still a valence of like, and that means we've got really good informants telling us where all the shit's going down so we can get ahead of it. Whereas in Japan, they're just like really nice people. They're just here to help out. So when I saw this show, I was like, I don't know if this is going to really deliver the way that Cops in America does, especially with the suspenseful sounding effects and the really just dripping with provocative leading narration over everything that was happening. So I think I watched 3 or 4 little clips, and I was right. It didn't deliver. There was one where there was a customary just sort of traffic stop. Somebody was driving a little bit erratically. There's a lot of really elderly drivers in Japan. So like, I think I've heard that the majority of collisions and issues with people driving cars is not drunk driving, but rather elders driving who shouldn't be anymore. So they see an erratic driver, they pull him over. It's actually a young person. And they're like, like the narrator in Japanese is saying, like, you won't believe what they're going to find here or what's happening. And then they talk to the young person and, it was like a busted taillight. That was it, actually. And they're like, hey, this taillight? I was like, oh, sorry, this is like my mom's car or my grandma's car or something. And I didn't know. And they're like, well, you should fix that. And he's like, all right, I'll tell her to fix it. And then they're like, how old are you? Here, show us your license. And it was a new license. So he had the license for less than a year. But he didn't have a Wakaba, young leaf sticker or magnet on the car. I didn't know this was technically the law, but it seems to have been, or at least in that prefecture. The magnet I'm discussing or just describing, it's vertical, looks like a little vertical flag with one side yellow and one side green. And that young leaf symbol is meant to signal, I'm a newbie, I'm a beginner. And he didn't have the newbie magnet displayed on the vehicle. And they said, hey, you don't have this on the vehicle, but like your license is only this, you're still this new of a driver. So that's a fine. And he's like, oh no, I'm really sorry. He's like, yeah, you got to do it. And if you don't do it within this time period, like that's going to be like a $20 fine. And I was like, man, this is all right. And then they pulled over another person on suspicion of drinking. The blood alcohol tolerance for drunk driving is very low in Japan. There's liability is shared for like everyone in the vehicle. If anyone is drunk, everyone can lose their license. Like first time is a huge fine. Second time is your license is gone for a long time, to the point where like the family might have to sell their home and go move near a station so people can get to work or school. And they pulled over somebody on suspicion of drinking. And she was just like really tired. Like she was the end of a long shift and was like, I'm just really tired. And they breathalyze her or whatever. And sure enough, there's no alcohol. And then he's like, oh, you won't believe what they find in the back of the car. And they go to a commercial break, and then in the back of the car, there's just like nothing. It was like energy drinks, and they thought that they might. So no chases. Like I watched for like half an hour, and I was like, when's something gonna happen? And just nothing happened. So that sounds like I would on one level, I would kill for my country of America to have so little to draw from in terms of conflict between people and police. So I was actually kind of loving it. How this narrator would keep setting you up for like, oh, you just wait until you look around that corner. Oh, and it's his wife, and they're getting along fine. So shout out to Japan cops. Let's see what's been going on in life. I wrote in my newsletter a couple months ago, Searles of Wisdom, available at my website /newsletter. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably didn't stumble in, and you know it exists, and you've subscribed or not subscribed, but it's where I dish slow takes. In my newsletter a couple of months ago, I described that I'm having a recurrence of back pain that I haven't really had since college. And it's a big bummer. And it's halted for months now, my ability to get into learning golf, which is a hobby I'm trying to learn because I live right next to a golf course, and I'm in Florida, and I'm trying to be outside more. So I'm still struggling. I've been doing hamstring stretches every single day. I went to my physical therapist. She's wonderful. Gave me some exercises, gave me some hip and back exercises that have I genuinely helped. I haven't had any back pain, but I also haven't golfed, so we don't know whether it's gonna, if I try to golf again, whether I'll have the same problem. We'll find out. But I went back because like the left side of what I called my hip. This is. I feel like when you're a kid and they teach you songs like head, shoulders, knees and toes, and like, or the arm bone is connected to the whatever the fuck bone. You learn a lot about various body parts, and the body parts that are more visible or more appendagey, those are easier to teach children because they can see a finger or an eyeball or ears, right? But everything kind of going down in the middle part of the human body, is just way, way less educated, right? Like at no point in school, in my K-12 education or even through college, did anyone like seriously sit me down and be like, all right, so when we say hip, this is what hips are. I'd seen a hip bone on a skeleton, but I hadn't really thought very much about like just the tangle of ligaments that wrap around it, right? And make us do shit. So when I told my physical therapist I was having hip pain and I got a bunch of hip exercises, without really isolating where the pain was. And it's not on her. If she'd done like a full workup and like, hey, is it this hurt, the back pain was overriding. So it's not like her fault, but it didn't do anything for me. And I spent like 8 weeks doing all this stuff. And I was starting to feel like hopeless. I was starting to feel like, oh, maybe am I already in replacement hip zone. I don't want to be in replacement hip zone, no matter how easy it is to replace hips. I kind of like being I want my hips to be all natural. You know, I don't want ladies walking by thinking, oh, look at that guy. He got a hip job, right? Proud of my wide set Northern European jeans and these just monstrous thighs and femurs that I was gifted. I'm not sure if artificial hips could even support what I got on down there, leg-wise. So I went back, and it wasn't the hip. I was pointing at, like, here's where the pain is. So the pain is right at if you're wearing pockets, if you're wearing a pants with pockets, the top of the left pocket, right where the crease would be, if you were like Levi Strauss making me a pair of jeans, right where you'd put that little rivet, you know what I'm saying? That hurts. And it hurts when I step up and, or compress my leg. And and then she puts her fingers there, and she's working on that a little bit. I was like, am I nuts? And she's like, oh no, this is as hard as a rock. This is your IT band. So you got to do all these other things. Totally different set of things. Anyway, not a lot going on in my life. But I did think through while I was there. I'd heard the phrase before, but I did think through. It's like if you were in an accounting firm and you were part of like the department that just like fixed people's computers and stuff, and you played guitar, you could totally start a group of like amateur musicians and call yourselves the IT band. And that made me remember that once I went to a bar called the Space Bar that was like retro computer themed. And that's where my brain was for most of the time. So I don't remember any of the exercises though. I just mostly remember imagining being in a band called the IT band. So I don't play any instruments, but I do have a sample board with buttons that can play music samples. So got that going for me. As I scrape the bottom of the barrel of what's going on in my life, which, maybe a more engaging way for me to frame that is, as I explore facets of life that aren't often discussed in this conversation with you, as I keep imagining this as a 6-seater bar, if I'm failing to enunciate today, I'll say a bar with 6 seats, just 6 chairs, me behind the bar making cocktails, you sitting at the bar asking your wife, you gonna stay? This is kind of weird. In the interest of making conversation, we're all using a computing device right now, me to speak to you, you to listen to me. And in the modern era, almost all of that requires networking. And networking in people's homes, traditionally in America, involves a cable internet provider that provides you a modem router combo unit that will broadcast Wi-Fi to the house, crappy quality. And of course, these days, people are buying all the smart things stuff and accessories they get from Lowe's and Home Depot and Best Buy. And those networks suck, right? But you're probably a techie person. You probably know that those networks are garbage. And when I say those networks suck, I mean like you're not getting the full speeds you could be getting. Things the tubes get clogged, right? The radio frequencies have interference with other channels on other stuff, and there's nothing built into the router to optimize that to make sure that the Wi-Fi performance is good. The solution usually is for people to get a standalone cable modem and a separate, ideally one that they own and they can choose and shop around, router that will route that traffic. And usually those routers include, the Wi-Fi access here. Okay. So we're all caught up on how internet works. It's good. Check. Well, I think that if you're a prosumer, if you're a smart, informed individual, such as the folks here listening to this, You probably know this. You probably buy a good router. And if you've got a large home, you probably know you want to buy a mesh router, whether that's like Orbi or Eero, or like everyone's got one that, like, you kind of have one plugged into Ethernet and the other two sort of provide them. You just imagine it like a mesh, right? Like a cage around your home, blanketing you in the sweet, internets, so that you can scroll to your heart's content and stream as much as you want. Well, if you're like me, or if you're buying a home and you're anxious about, like, I don't want $300, $400, $500 good internet. I want to have the best internet experience at home that I can have. That I can have reasonably, that I can maintain and configure to the custom, the configuration of my home. Maybe that means, like, I want to run Ethernet to every room, right? So that devices can hardwire in. You put a network switch and you plug stuff in. Well, a number like if you go down that route, if you're one of those sickos like me. If you go down that route, you wind up buying a bunch of hardware from a company called Ubiquiti. And Ubiquiti, that was like the original full stack of software and hardware and network gear. They've rebranded the consumer-facing networking gear and software controllers and so forth to Unify. Neither of these words are spelled acceptably. They have I's where they should have Y's. But Unify, with an I... let's see. Let me think in my house. Like, it's a slippery slope, right? Like when I told my home networking contractor, which I was very fortunate to have, because I had so many contractors in the house anyway, to like make the floors, not be urine soaked. Sorry, potentially TMI. When we moved in here, there was a lot of stuff to clean up. Painters and so forth. I was like, I want to have at least one contractor who's like here to do something fun and not just remedial. Like, I want to put a big ass fucking projector and a screen up. I want Ethernet in every room, chicken in every pot. When I said I wanted Unify gear for the home network, I didn't realize what I was asking for. What I was asking for, and now this is the shit that just wound up in the patch box. I've got like a little like box where the cable modem goes. And, it's thank God it's large, because a lot of shit goes in there now. I've got two 16-port network switches, each with 8 ports that provide PoE, or power over Ethernet, meaning you plug a large power supply into the switch, and then the switch is able to, over the Ethernet wire, power other devices. Like access points, like Wi-Fi access points or switches or other devices, without them also needing any other cables. Just that one Ethernet. Now they have power and networking in one. So it's great for like low profile stuff, or if you don't have a power outlet next to a device. PoE is super nice. You got a controller. Before I get there, the thing that you actually plug the modem into is not the router. It's called the Ubiquiti or Unify Security Gateway, USG. It's basically like it takes the outside world internet in one port, and then your network on the other port, and then it does something. I don't really know what it does. It's secure. I don't know. It's a firewall. It's a necessary thing that you got to buy if you're going to go down this cursed rabbit hole. So I have a USG, and that's the entry point. I've got these 2 physical switches. Connected to the PoE ports of those 2 switches, I have throughout the house 4 wireless access points. One upstairs, because the upstairs in Florida homes is often, just toothpick wood, like wood frame housing. But the downstairs, because that's often concrete block, especially the exterior. There's so much concrete downstairs that we have 3 access points in ceilings downstairs, 2 indoors and then 1 outside by the pool. This is a level of complexity that is just absolutely obscene, and nothing like any of my past domiciles where I just had one router and I would try to like spend as much of my life in the little bubble nearby that router. So I got all that shit. I've got network switches plugged into like 3 or 4 of the rooms, Becky's office, my office. We've got a like a bonus room, and that acts as our like, you know, podunk server rack where like our ring up security system and our Synology network storage device sit and so forth. But there's this one device on there, and that's, so the USG offends me. This thing that's just like like a valve almost. I mean, it's got like there's circuitry. It's doing some kind of computer. I don't know what the fuck. I don't know why it has to be a standalone device. But there's this other device called the controller, and it is a non-optional device if you want to go down the UniFi route. Now, they do have all-in-one shit. So like, before anyone writes me an email, you could just buy a Dream Machine. Like, yes, I know. But I didn't know that then, and it was less true 4 years ago than it is today. There's a device called a controller, and you could have, there's a cloud key, like it's a little skinny stick, and it runs the server software. I have a big one called the Cloud Key Generation 2 Plus, and it's large. I don't want it to be large, but like the other thing is, once you go down this just absolute black hole of spending, is that UniFi will do like drop ship style releases for like, oh yeah, this router is sold out for 6 months, right? Or this, the smaller version of this controller just hasn't been on sale for a year, and you'll go into the forums and be like, is it ever going to go on sale? And they'll say, well, you could go on Amazon and pay twice as much from a third-party seller, taking advantage of the fact that the stock issues are always there. But in reality, like, we don't know if UniFi or Ubiquiti is ever going to make more of this device, which then immediately sets off red flags like, should I be buying into this ecosystem if they're just constantly discontinuing products? So everything feels so tenuous. So I bought the one that was available, thinking maybe that's the future. It's a chunky boy. It's if you had external DVD or Blu-ray drive, like a big one of those. It's got a hard disk in it for recording like security camera footage, because that's another thing that you can plug into your UniFi system is security cameras. And it can be powered over PoE, power over Ethernet. And so that's what I had. I had in that patch box, I had the modem. I had those 2 16-port, network device switches. I had that USG that I don't understand plugged into the modem. I had this controller, which is like console sized. I've got a UPS there to, as a battery backup. An egg timer to reset the cable modem every couple days because it needs it. And then a handful of smart hubs, like my Lutron smart hub. You go there, and Becky always tells guests that Justin loves to show this off. And I do, because I feel like that's the only payoff for the pain that like this menagerie of plastic and circuitry has caused me. So I plugged the controller into one of those PoE ports, and it creates like a little pancake. I've got like, a one switch on top of another switch. I realize a lot of power is going through these switches, and they have like metal, plastic enclosures, but like there's a lot of heat there. And I thought, what would be great is let's put a metal enclosure that's also going to generate some heat over this PoE cable, right? So they're all on top of each other. And I knew that like it wasn't wise. I don't have a fan inside my patch box, and I was using up all the thickness. So even if I could put a cooling solution in there, what I didn't want to happen was, I don't want like a closet in my house to be taken over by this shit. And I knew that's the path that I would be going down if I let myself ask questions about the setup that I had wound up with. So I noticed within a few days of buying, this is about 1.5 years ago, that it ran pretty hot. Like, it was hot to the touch, hot enough to be painful to touch it. And it would go down sometimes. To be clear, the controller's job is to assign IP addresses to devices. It does that, the DHCP task. It controls like what kind of traffic is happening. So to monitor the traffic, it'll like, if you want to block certain types of traffic, like MDNS, IGMP snooping, or whatever those settings are. It's kind of like the networking boss, and it kind of keeps all the other devices in line and updates the firmware of all these. Of course, they all have separate firmware updates and bullshit. Like the controller device has firmware, but also the networking software it runs has what I think what they call firmware, like its own update. And then all of these unified devices have firmware. If you're still listening to this segment, thank you. I feel very heard right now. So all that to say, the controller would get so hot it would go offline sometimes. And I would never really know if it was offline. I would very often misinterpret random networking issues. Like, for example, when my smart blinds wouldn't close or open in response to Siri, I would think, oh, that's the home bridge. That's the home automation bullshit running on my Synology downstairs. But then when I got back from Japan and they were consistently not working, I realized, oh shit. What's happening is this controller is down so much that devices that should have fixed IP addresses, which is how I've configured that home bridge to know where my bond bridge, oh my fucking Lord, I'm just listening to myself. The home bridge is a virtual piece of software that makes devices that shouldn't work on HomeKit work on HomeKit. So I can automate them and yell at Siri and then get mad when Siri doesn't listen to me. It's a national pastime. Those talk to Bond bridges, and Bond is a company that sells RF blasters that work with a bunch of different kinds of devices that you might buy at Home Depot that just have like a proprietary remote, like to control a ceiling fan or electronic blinds that go up and down. So I got this Rube Goldberg machine, and it doesn't work right sometimes. And that could mean that like I need to restart home bridge. It could mean I need to restart the Bond bridge. It could mean I have to charge the blinds. Like there's a whole checklist in my head of what to do when, especially if I'm in Japan, Becky texts me, oh yeah, the blinds aren't working. I'm like, all right, so how much time you got? And if I'm going to be back within a week, I'll just say, hey, just ignore those rooms of the house until I'm home. I feel like I need a minute. All right. So what I realized was happening was that the IP addresses that I'd configured for those Bond bridges were wrong. They weren't the fixed IP that I'd configured. And that's why I couldn't talk to them. And then I started thinking, I was like, oh shit, when our pool controls don't work, like the hot tub won't get hot. And I check it, and sure enough, its IP address is now some random fucking IP address that it just picked out of a hat instead of the fixed IP that the controller is responsible for using DHCP protocol, telling it, no, you shut up. You shut up your face. This is your IP address. And then I realized, fuck me. Even though that controller doesn't theoretically need to be running 24/7, when it goes down, anything that renews a DHCP lease is just going to be... It's going to be whatever address it imagines, because nothing's going to be telling it what to do. And that's going to result in all my smart home stuff breaking and probably other mysterious networking snafus as well. So all of this to say, I am finally in a good place because I did the thing I should have done initially. Is if you plug in a new computer, this is a pro tip to anyone who doesn't already know this. If you plug in a computing thing, and it very quickly gets very hot, something is probably wrong. So I pulled it out of where it was in the patch box, and I plugged it in my office. And it's got a little shelf now, and it's not powered over PoE anymore. It's just powered by a much lower voltage. And I think this is the part that really is mattered. It wasn't that it was in a crowded space. It's that, the only way to solve this is either pay for GPT Plus so that ChatGPT can read these forums for you, or go to the Ubiquiti Unify forums and start Googling like, why is this overheating? And then what you find out is like, it will draw way more voltage from the PoE port than it needs to the point of overheating itself. But if you just use like a quick charge 2.0 USB thing, and you plug that in, it doesn't overheat. It only draws the amount that it needs. For fuck's sake. So I did that, and then suddenly it wasn't overheating anymore. But by the time I figured out that, I had just gone to the Ubiquiti support site, filed an RMA. It was so, this part is where I have a pleasant technical support experience. This is real good. I go to their support site. I say, I have an issue. It says, is it a hardware issue? I say, yes. It's like, what's your serial number or MAC address or whatever the device? I say, here it is. Also, you print those too small. Please make that sticker just a bit larger, please. And then I hit go after writing like a sentence of what was wrong. And it's like, okay, cool. Somebody will be in touch. Within 30 seconds, I had an RMA approved email. And that usually just means here's a shipping label. And if you ship it to us, we'll wait till we receive it, then we will inspect it, and then we'll ship something back to you. That might be a replacement or a repaired unit. And so I print the shipping label, and I go and get a box, and I'm like, you know what? It's working. I'm just going to leave it be. I don't need to necessarily replace it. Maybe I'll just cancel the RMA. But then like the next fucking day, a brand new one, a retail version, a brand new one in like the retail box shows up at my house. It's a couple of years newer. It hasn't been overheating and turning it to the point of having to turn itself off 5 times a day. And I was like, yeah, all right, sure. And it came with like a little return thingy so I can return it easily. So I plugged the new one in, and Bob's your uncle, everything's great. But like from a customer experience perspective, Apple is really the only other company that I can think of that will treat your time as valuable. Like if you have a piece of hardware and you're having a bad time and you go to support and then they treat you with distrust, like now it's the burden of proof is on you, customer, that your shit's fucked. Or when you call in and they're like, well, have you tried these 4 steps that everyone will have tried by the time they've taken time out of their day to call me? And they make you go through, oh, yes, I've restored. I factory restored. Yes, I've done this. And then they're like, well, you didn't do it with me, sir. So can you please factory restore again? I'm like, and then I've got a feeling a lot of people are the tech support person in their family. And so then what do? You don't factory restore again. You say, okay, sure, doing that now. And then you go and check your email. And then 30 seconds after that, yep, factory restored. And they're not paying attention to how much time has passed because they're probably juggling 25 chats at the time. And then they'll give you the free thing. But then, it's the extra hoops. To be able to just be trusted and be like, oh, yeah. Sometimes shit gets fucked. That's what networking is. Here, have a new one. And it was over a year ago. So I maybe it's a 2-year warranty by default or whatever. I don't know. But like, it was such a pleasant experience. For something that, on one hand, you could reasonably say was my dumbass fault. On the other hand, I think it was probably more that PoE is just not appropriate for this device, and they support that. So they stood behind the product and they shipped out a new one. And that was my first sponsor. My first sponsor read is go buy some Unify. It's going to take over your life, but once in a while you'll have an okay experience, and that'll feel pretty good because of how your general happiness set point has been lowered over the period of years because of just how much complexity and fragility you feel as you walk around your home. You're going to be so low that you're going to have one good experience with a support, not even a person. It's just a form. That's even better. And then they're going to ship you a replacement and you're going to be like, oh, and that's why I love this company, So that's first sponsor for the podcast, Ubiquiti Unify. Yeah, go do it. If you're a sicko like me and you just want to have the best that money can buy without spending too much money, without getting into the real professional grade shit, it like that require people to actually be watching and monitoring it all day. This merely suggests that you probably should keep an eye on a lot more shit than you would otherwise, but then you don't, and then just stuff falls falls off the network and you have no idea until you go explore. Good Lord. So yeah. Thank you for sponsoring this episode of the podcast, Unify. Coupon code is go fuck yourself. It's a GOPHUCK. There's a filter. I think, so I had to do PHUCK. Yourself. URSELF. So that's first sponsor for the podcast. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time. Yeah. Thanks for your time. I guess I couldn't say thanks for your money. Not sponsoring this week's episode. My doctor keeps jerking me around with scheduling. So I moving it forward a day and then back a day and then back to the first day, which is, that's just normal doctor's office stuff. But it triggered a conversation with Becky. I don't know if this is how generally true this is for people. But for me, if I have a single hour-long appointment at 3 p.m., my entire day mentally is going to revolve around that obligation. So if I'm trying to think creatively and big picture, it's just different stuff comes out. I tend to do better focusing on procedural, short, small ball, like tasks I know I can get done in a certain amount of time. When I have 0 things on my calendar, it's the world is my oyster. I can do anything I want. I feel unfettered freedom. I feel no constraints. If I have one thing on my calendar, that is enough. I no longer have that, right? Yeah, sure, I could have an amazing 6 hours of work and I could get all this done, but then I got this meeting and I've never been able to fully get over that particular mental hurdle. And it was difficult even as I started spending less time in leadership meetings at Test Double. My schedule went to way fewer meetings, maybe averaging previously 3 or 4 a day down to just maybe 0.5 at some point, 0.75 meetings a day. But that still means every other day is lost to me. Oh shit. I got one call at 2. There goes today. Eventually I did realize, because the reason I kept scheduling afternoon meetings was I was telling myself that my best, most productive time is the morning. Unfortunately, that is literally true. But if I have to choose between, do I want my best efforts to go towards this creative work and while still having this hanging over my head? Probably no. So now I've become more morning meeting positive, I suppose. If you're a manager or a leader, your life has been lost to calendaring for so long that you might not really relate to what I'm discussing. But if you're a programmer or if you're somebody who works creatively and mostly as an individual contributor, write into podcast@Searles.co and just tell me whether this resonates with you as just having one thing at the end of the day or one thing in a few hours from now. Even if the thing that you're working on can't possibly take you more than an hour, something about the ability for me the spark plug for creativity just doesn't quite fire the same way. So do I have a point to that story? No. All right, let's move on to follow-up. This time, nothing from previous episodes, but there are a few things that I posted recently. One is I had a really frustrating Safari bug, and I wrote a blog post explaining what it was. So not on a Safari. That is a thing you can do at Disney down here, and I was at Animal Kingdom today, so good point. Could have been a real Safari, but I mean Safari, the web browser. To be honest, that's probably what you were thinking. I'm making a website, and I had a whole bunch of WebP previews in a list. And I'm not used to using WebP because I'm not a Google person, but it's an image format that's like GIF, like can do animated small videos, but at an appropriate level of compression, whereas GIF is those files are huge. And I was looking at 30 or 40, and it was all the same URL on all these image tags. And I'd look at them, and they looked great, and then I'd refresh the page because I was working on the page, and then I'd refresh again, and then they'd all disappear. And they would just go to that image not found, filler icon. And I'd be like, all right, well, we open up the dev tools, and there's nothing in the console. There's nothing in the network pane. Just doesn't work. And I thought it was a WebP thing. So I'm looking at like, all right, so is it something about WebP in image tags and lazy loading? It only happened when I had loading equals lazy. So that's a thing you can do on image tags now is not by default, they eager load. So when you load the web page, all of the image tags on the document will load, making more network requests and consuming more bandwidth, even if the user never scrolls such that that image would be in view. The lazy loading thing will only once, every browser configures this differently, but basically when the browser predicts that you're about to have this thing come into view, it'll try to time that network request. Like, so while you're scrolling, it'll start to load in those images. So if it's lazy loaded, and I thought if it was like because WebP, because that's like also only recently supported by Apple. But what it turned out to be was if the image is resolved after an HTTP redirect, like, so it's got to go to the server to ask, hey, where's this image? And the server's like, oh, not here, bub. It's over here. And then the second request goes and loads the image. Apparently, Safari doesn't like too many redirects. It'll just like nope out. And unfortunately for me, that behavior of redirecting all these images is the default behavior for active storage, which is like the Rails way to have uploaded images and videos in your app. So it's the kind of foot gun. So I wrote the bug because I was hoping to feed Google because I hadn't seen anything about this before. And I found my own workaround, which was like, don't have that mode turned on and instead just proxy these images so that there's not a redirect, right? Like I was able to fix my issue. But I every time I encounter bugs like these, I'm left with like just a few possibilities. Like, am I the only one experiencing this? Or are other people not posting, the issue that they're having, right? So like they are experiencing, but no one posts it. Or 3, are other people experiencing it and either ignoring it or so badly misdiagnosing it that they never come to realize what the problem is. And that, I think about that just a lot with bugs. I've said before on this very program, like I think one of the reasons I'm in this racket of naming and shaming bugs is that software quality is so poor across the board that if you're not literally a software developer who can figure out why the thing is broken or where things went wrong, generations of humans now have been raised to think that like, oh, they must have clicked it wrong, right? It's their fault that the software is not working. There's something wrong with them. They have sin in their heart. They touched themselves last night. And as a result, their email doesn't load or an iMessage goes missing, right? Between devices, when it's really like, no, it's just a bug. Touch yourself all you want. Another bit of follow-up, something else I posted. I did a clip of a rant from the previous episode of this show. It's up on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I love the format of taking explainer videos are one thing. Like here's me explaining a topic, right? And then here's some stock video to keep you entertained while I educate you. It's sort of like it's putting peanut butter around the pill, right? To try to like make it go down easier. A spoonful of sugar would have been a cleaner analogy. I think the peanut butter stuff is mostly for dogs. Wait, no, not for dogs. What the fuck? Why do I associate putting pills in peanut butter as a thing you do for dogs when famously dogs, though they love peanut butter, Wait a second. Is that just chocolate? Can dogs have peanut butter? Well, fuck me, man. I'm not a dog owner. But my assumption these days is like, until someone tells you otherwise, they might have a nut allergy. So that's even sadder, right? Like, what if you're the one guy whose dog is allergic to nuts, but totally fine with chocolate, and he can't tell you? Fuck. Anyway, I did a clip. What was I talking about in that clip? It was Siri. Yeah, and AI. And how many... Just watch it. The maps and the calendars and how much manual bug maneuvering that users have learned how to do to get around their system. I would like to do more clips like this. I use Descript, which is a AI forward Electron app movie editor thing that is focused primarily on podcast tools, explainer videos, good with the transcripts and the captions, and stock video and pulling in media is very easy. It's very fast, quick, lightweight editor. It's not meant for very visually compelling 4K stuff with perfect, no extensions or plugins or anything. It's a nice tool. Like, if I can turn them around quickly, I'd like to do more of these. I don't know which rants will qualify, but if there's anything in any episode that you think is like, hey, that would actually be a funny video, let me know, because I'm new at this. I don't know how to promote this program. I don't know that I want it to be successful. I don't know that it is successful because I don't really track many metrics. And I don't know what successful means for a podcast without sponsors, except for Unify. So if you have any clip ideas, shoot them my way, podcast@searls.co. And if while I'm on the topic, I've been thinking lately, I never ask you to share this podcast. I don't say, hey, tell your friends. You got a friend? You want to make their day feel longer? Tell them about Breaking Change. I'm very pleased. I don't know that I've ever requested anyone go into the Apple podcast directory and give us 5 stars. Us meaning you and me, because you're part of this mess. Open up. You know what? Stop what you're doing. If you're driving, get on your phone. Just put the phone right in front of your face while you're driving, please. Because this is more important than your safety. You got to go to the home screen. You got to tap that button if you're on iOS and you have do not disturb while driving turned on. Then you're going to have to, after face unlocking, you're going to have to click the I'm not driving button. That's okay. I'm a professional. You can click I'm not driving. Then you're going to go to the podcast app, even if you're using Overcast. I'm sorry. Or Spotify. If you use Spotify, I'll take those ratings, I guess. But you go in the podcast player, you find Breaking Change, and you click 5 stars. And if you're an hour into a podcast like we are here, and you feel like I haven't earned 5 stars, instead of putting in 4 stars or 3 stars, consider writing me an email, podcast@searls.co, and your IP address. The IP address is so that I can just, wait to get the 4-star or the 3-star review and then block you. Because we're ride or die. I'm doing this for you, right? And that sweet, sweet Unify money. So buy a bunch of Unify stuff. So anyway, I feel so stupid, right? This free podcast that doesn't matter. Saying like, yeah, go tell other people, subscribe this video. Like, is it just that my heart's not in it? Is it that like all this shit that I'm building lately is like got my name on it, that it feels extra vain? Is it that my brand is so like subversive that the idea of earnestly promoting anything I do seems off brand? I don't know. If you would like to psychoanalyze any of that shit that rolls around my head every night before I go to bed, podcast@searls.co, and that's an email that no matter what you write, I will read it. That'll go to the top of the mailbag. I might even pull forward the segment because it's cheaper than therapy and it's guaranteed to be entertaining. Other follow-up, the episode won't be out until second week of July. Because his turnaround time is apparently a little slower than mine, or he's a professional and he actually thinks about when he releases podcasts on a schedule. Bizarre. I was guesting on a podcast called Vision Pros, as in PROS, professionals, with boy, I'm stepping all over I have one job, and that's to talk into a microphone. Tim Chatham. I didn't actually catch how to pronounce his last name. So Tim, he's got a couple podcasts. One's called iPad Pros, about using iPad as a professional, as a full-time device, and Vision Pros, about using the Vision Pro, either full-time or for real, for serious, for an inadvisable amount of time. And so he emailed me and he was like, you seem to be using an inadvisable amount of Vision Pro in your workflow. And I was like, oh, that's accurate. So we had a lovely discussion for almost, like a couple hours about the state of things with Vision Pro, where it falls down and where it can get better. So I did a review in February of where I was at. I'm now in a new place about it. I haven't really relitigated all of that here because I haven't, but he was asking the questions and I answered them. So if you're interested in my Vision Pro takes, I think that'll come out in like July 11th, he said. Boy, he's on top of it. He knows exactly what date. So yeah, feel free to go subscribe. I'll put that in the links or just, check it out when you do. Yeah, but that's about all the follow-up I've got, which brings us to some people's favorite portion of the program, and that is Aaron Tenderlove Patterson inflicting a pun upon us. Here I've got it up in iMessage. He's got a text message. Aaron knows I'm not on TikTok or much of the social feeds, but he's a connoisseur. He likes to stay hip with what's going on in the world. And so he, from time to time, will copy paste a TikTok video at me. So he sent me one of a girl crying after seeing a Cybertruck because it's so ugly, which is, can confirm. Here we go. All right. Invisible ink. Today's pun. I can confirm the first part of this pun is true. I recently traveled to Toronto for work. I refused to take a red eye, though, because I feel they are a fly-by-night operation. I recently traveled to Toronto for work. I refuse to take a red eye, though, because I feel that they're a fly-by-night operation. A red eye, if you're not familiar, is an expression that refers to a flight, a plane flight, that departs in one evening, and then, thanks to the miracle of time zones and so forth, arrives in the morning at wherever it's going. And if you live on the West Coast and you're flying to the East Coast, unless you want to fly early in the day, very often that means that the only flights out to the East are, effectively red eyes, which means, hey, you don't, guess what? You don't get to sleep tonight, right? So the fly-by-night operation, right, doesn't, can't be relied upon, isn't safe, isn't, It doesn't tickle me in the way that some of the other ones do. Is that wordplay? Yes. 100%. And that already puts it in the top 10 of the 14 that we have so far. I think we've been hovering in this zone for a while. There's been a bunch of episodes kind of like all clustered together. I think this is going to also be not as good as my feet really hurt from walking, so I've decided to switch to meters. But better than when Apple product engineers ask their developers for estimates, do you think they iPad their deadlines? That one's just got some grammar stuff going on. I get what I should have cleaned it up for her. But again, the whole conceit here is I'm just reading invisible ink. So I'll paste that in. That becomes the new number 10. So version 15. The new number 10 podcast pun from Aaron. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate your time. And after the pun, I mean, where's my energy, right? I guess, come on. After the pun, you are here on purpose, damn it. Although I gotta admit, I got a frog in my throat. Just saying that phrase here. We have a lot of frogs down here, and they find a way. So my pool is caged, is in a pool enclosure with screens, and in general, shit can't get in. But when shit gets in, like geckos and frogs, it has a similarly hard time getting out. Particularly in our balcony upstairs, which is also screened in. I feel like it's at least once a week that a frog will somehow get to the second story of my home. I don't know if they're hopping up, like a downspout or something. I'm looking behind me now and realizing it is pouring ass rain. You might be hearing, this might be the lo-fi beats, depending on whether the mic is picking up the rain on the roof. Anyway, about once a week, a frog finds its way into the balcony. And here's a shitty thing I do, because this is the place where I talk about ways in which I'm a piece of shit. If the frog is in the balcony and it's already dead, like it's been hopping around for days and it dries out, I hate picking up dead things. I just hate it. Even with gloves, even with like, a nappy or a nappy, plastic bag or paper towel. Just hate it. Ugh. Don't like dead things. And that's why I prefer you not die around me. If you're going to die, do it on your own time. Not in my house, please. That's the only reason. If they're already dead, I don't pick them up. I let them sit there. Because we have cleaners to clean the house every other week. And even though we've never asked them to clean the balcony, they generally will mop the balcony. And they always take care of the frogs. And they've never mentioned it. The frogs just disappear and it becomes not my problem. And so I know that whenever, because they're here every 14 days, I am a median 7 days away from frog cleaners coming and taking care of the dead frog. But in fairness to me, the most important kind of fairness, I am a frogitarian enough to be like, look, if the frog's still alive, if it's still hopping around, if it's showing signs of life, I am batting 1,000 for saving the frog's life, because I've figured out a strategy where I sprinkle a little water on it because they're probably dry. I take a Tupperware thing with a lid, and it's a very soft one. I kind of it's got like a little bit of rubber gasket around the top. So I kind of just brush it gently. It'll freak out. It'll try to they're always trying to go through the screen somehow. So as they get scared, they go into the mesh, which is not helpful. So I just gently kind of scrape against that, and we're going to pull it towards the Tupperware kind of thing, Rubbermaid plastic box. And I don't know why. I would imagine in my head, there's no way you're getting a frog in there and keeping it there. But they always jump into it eventually, within a few minutes. And then I just kind of close the lid, because it's kind of like a trap. Close the lid, walk downstairs, walk outside the pool enclosure downstairs, because you live in a little bio fence. And I'll walk towards the nature preserve where that borders our home, and I'll let the frog out, and it jumps away, and it's happy as a clam. Are clams happy? Anyway, frog in my throat. So if that's coming through here, if I'm sounding sultrier than usual, I'm finding I'm having a lot of need to swallow and cough today. I'm holding it in because I've got work to do. All right. News. What is going on in the world? I don't know if you noticed, but there was a U.S. presidential debate. And that is as much as I'm going to talk about that. Fill in the blank with your opinions. Here, I'll just leave 30 seconds of dead air, and then you can talk at your device. and fill that void with whatever you think. Okay, I made it like 4 seconds. Not going to talk about that, but now that we're in U.S. political heat season, the thing that I want as a news consumer is just give me some sense of, I want news to be predictive. I know this is a terrible thing. Like, I should be an activist and I should be fighting for the causes that matter to me, and I should be making a fucking difference, and I should be focused on policy. But like, what I really want is better horse race polling, so I can have some sense of what the fuck is happening and what's likely to happen in November, so I can stop thinking about it as fast as possible. You know, during the Nate Silver golden era of 2008, 2012, and then he didn't fuck up 2016. A lot of things fucked up 2016 in terms of poll predicting. That meant I would pay a 30-second tax every day, check the model, be like, that's what the percentages are. Ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's bad. I would have a moment. And then I'd be like, all right, whatever. We currently live in an era where polling is so goddamned unreliable that it is hard to know, even looking at polls. And thanks to Nate Silver's blog and all of the sort of, you know, the cottage industry of polling analysis that has been baby birded through the media to me, whether it's Nate Cohn at New York Times or Harry what the fuck at CNN, who started at 538, whoever these people are, I feel like I know enough to be dangerous about how to read polls. And what they tell me is that the response rates are so fucking hysterically bad that the amount of post-processing, so to speak, that statisticians have to do to make their poll resemble anything that's at all reflective of the American population, or much less a particular state that they might be polling in. They have to put so much fucking spin on the ball to be like, well, I had one black person respond to this poll in Michigan out of 1,000 people. So now I gotta like multiply whatever they said by 13 to get them up to like, you know, a reasonable percentage or whatever. Or I guess 130, right? And that's how you wind up with certain polls that are outlier. You know, if you look at the crosstabs. So polling has gotten bad because of low response rate. Why is low response rate low? There's a lot of reasons, but one reason is the only way for them to fucking get a hold of you is to call you. And whether they're robo-dialing or manually dialing, whether it's a push poll or a public policy poll, whatever it is, there is so much spam calling and messaging happening right now that, like, if I don't know the phone number, if it's not in my contacts, I've thought about, there's a setting in iOS where you can literally just have it block by default all calls that aren't in your contacts. And I know I should never do that because a doctor's office is going to call you. You know, you shouldn't click that button. But given how seldom a real human calls me on purpose ever, I've thought about clicking that button. If a pollster calls you, they're not going to be in your contacts. They might not say who they are in the caller ID if you have that. No one who's not so lonely that they just pick up the phone when it rings to chat. No one who... There are some people who are so dialed into politics that they sit by the phone. Maybe they still pay for a landline out of the hopes like, honey, maybe tonight they're going to ask what we think about Joe Biden's age or whatever. And I'm going to finally get to say what I think. And it's going to be represented as a data point. It's not trending in some direction where suddenly public policy polling is going to ever get better if the way that we do it is effectively like butt dialing America. So instead, what I propose, this is me workshopping an idea that I have had floating around in my head. I might have tweeted something like this during COVID, because one of the things that happened during COVID was I've memory holed all of this now. Google and Apple, they get together and they say, hey, we're going to do this what was it, COVID exposure API thing, right? Where each platform would do a sort of minimal amount of location tracking and opt-inly, what was it, a state by state thing? Like let you know, hey, you were at a place, we can't say where or who or what or why, but you were at a place that somebody had COVID, test yourself before you wreck yourself. Right. And that whole experiment, because it moved at lightning speed relative to normal, like operating system releases, but that whole experiment didn't really move the needle. It didn't really work. I don't think lives were saved because of this feature. But if you could get the band together again and get Google and Apple talking about, hey, right now, public policy officials, politicians, people in government have no earthly way to listen to the will of the people, because all they get are the polarized extremes of people who are watching cable news all day or listening to, podcasts on the left and talk radio on the right, or deplatform podcasts on the far right, where it's like they got to teach people how to find the XML file to get into their players. Those are the people who call in to their senator's office and foam at the mouth, right? And it used to be the job of public polling to be like, yeah, you might be hearing a lot of calls around this, but like 70% of the country feels this way. And now the only reason we still have that at all is because we've got some statisticians who are like trying to stay employed as public pollsters, fudging the numbers to try to model a representative sample out of an just absurdly unrepresentative set of responses that they get to their polls. If you look at the real numbers of like response rates over time, they're so low now that like it's really wish casting by pollsters to really be able to say anything is like a margin of error of this minus this. Because a simple stats 101, if you take a class, it'll say that like polls really work because of how standard deviations work. If you have 1,000 people in a simple random sample, an SRS, I remember this from junior year of high school and I haven't thought about it a whole lot since. 1,000 people out of 1,000,000, and every single one responds and says their honest to God opinion. You can draw that normal distribution and you can capture that the two standard deviations out to 98.6% or whatever. I think that's it. Then you can be that confident within a few percentage points, even for, an audience of 1,000,000 people with just 1,000. And some people like they intuitively don't like that idea. They're like, how could 1,000 random people possibly represent millions of people? And the answer is math. But nowadays, like, we're so far from having a simple random sample, which again depends on everyone actually fucking responding. Like in the olden days, you'd have like they'd call the same number over and over and over again until they got the person. Nowadays, there's just public polls are so broken that I think that as a public service to the world on a country by country basis, on a state by state basis, whatever, Apple and Google should partner with first each other to build a platform or an API where you'd get a special kind of push notification at genuine random, right? It would be opt out, meaning it would be on by default. So it's not just like sickos like me who follow politics who've opted into this feature. And that notification would say, yo, in the interest of the public good, will you fill out a form of 10 questions? And instead of having somebody on the fucking phone to like try to tease apart, well, when they say that they're for this, are they really for this? Like, no, just have it be a fucking operating system level form. Like, we're done. People aren't going to talk on the phone with strangers, right? If you want people under 35, you're not going to get any. If it can't just be like 5 clicks, right? But if it was operating system level, if it was just 5 clicks, if it was a special, platform provided user interface, and it was clear that it was partnered with only genuine nonprofits, not push pollsters, who were trying to gauge public opinion, maybe on policy issues, maybe on a horse race election. Overnight, I believe, if you had all of iOS and all of Android just turned on by default, overnight, we would go from unbelievable, like the worst polling quality that we've ever had since public pollsters became a thing. We would probably go to the absolute best, most reliable snapshots of what people really thought. And that, to me, would that be valuable for humanity? I don't know. Would that be valuable to, senators and Congress people trying to like make a represent their people better, their constituents better, and help refocus them on something other than just the noise of, the far extremes? Maybe. But what it'll do in no uncertain terms is it'll like make me feel a lot better about like, oh yeah, okay, so this is where the race is. Yeah, yes, I see. Yes, things are exactly this fucked. Thank you, news. That is all I ever wanted from you, is like, tell me on a scale of 1 to fucked how fucked everything is, and please make like I need to be able to trust that this is an accurate fucked reading. Like, you're telling me it's a 7 out of fucked, and your confidence rating is as low as these polls are, I've just wasted my time. Tell me how fucked it is. So that's my feature request. I think that would be wonderful. While we're talking about news and features, it's been several months now since the Digital Markets Act went into effect in March. That is the EU legislation where there's a regulatory body that can now force gatekeepers like Apple with the iPhone and now the iPad to open up, allow additional app marketplaces, and so forth. We've talked about this. And one of the things in that early discussion, the first several months of discussion, was Apple didn't seem to have a lot of leverage. They could threaten to pull out of the EU if they didn't like it. They could be intransigent and just, follow the like malicious compliance, whatever you want to call it, like design something that fits inside of the law, but is very minimally accessible. Make a deal so bad where they're charging 50 cents per download for all third-party app store downloads, over 1 million. Make it such a bad deal on paper that no one's going to really do it. And then wait for the EU to say that doesn't comply, which is exactly what they did. And now that the EU is in the point of saying, hey, this doesn't comply and you gotta change it, Apple can just keep on, apparently, just tweak it, put it up for renewal or for approval, go back and forth. And yes, they might be held liable and for some fines or whatever, but as long as they're able to maintain the status quo where basically they have a monopoly on and tight control that they want, it's probably, from their cynical perspective, if I was Tim Apple, like I'd rather just pay the lawyers, just drag this out for 5-10 years or whatever. And by then, the European Parliament's probably going to be taken over by a bunch of fucking right-wing fascists anyway, and they're not going to care about this. Sorry to my friends in Europe, but I won't talk about US politics, but I will talk how to turn on EU politics because I don't feel feelings about that the same way. France is voting today. Speaking of far right politicians. So yeah, it's like, like Apple's going to outlast all of these people, right? So playing like, the delay tactics and a battle of inches here, I think strategically makes sense. And that was the conversation we had a few months ago. What they just did last week was so brilliant. This is just game respecting game here. This is where I come from in this. I am an Apple fan, but I am not an Apple shill. What I am is somebody who likes, just like the political horse racing, I like to watch all of the shit go down from a safe vantage point and then comment on how well the shit goes down. You know, how fun is it to watch the train wreck in motion? And this has been a fairly fun train wreck, I suppose. But it had limits in terms of leverage. Apple's leverage here is just drag it out. And that's as a narrative, as a story, that's kind of, you know, oh, all right. That is what it is. That's the end of the story. We probably won't revisit this very often because the blow by blows after that point are just going to be, they're all going to slot into that story. One thing that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, John Gruber during Fireball, I think he was one and done, or 2 small posts, saying everything that I want to say about what happened next. But what happened is Apple, after the WWDC announcements of all these new features that are so cool, I got great reviews, great previews. Apple Intelligence, you know, like the basically making Siri good, doing all this AI stuff. The ability to stream the iPhone and control the iPhone and all of its notifications inside of a Mac, right? Only available on the Mac. One other thing, doesn't matter what. Another feature that people want. Apple announces, well, you know, hey, because we don't know if any of these are going to violate the DMA because they do have to do with inter-platform stuff, like having these smart assistants on the phone. Like if the EU is going to regulate how we do that, or that we can't make money off of sales of ChatGPT Plus or whatever it is, or that we have to be able to sub out our assistant for somebody else. We're taking what we think as Apple, the prudent measure of just withholding all of these juicy features that everybody wants and expects. That means if I'm in the EU and I just watched WWDC and I'm excited for these features, now instead of being on the winning side of like, yeah, I get my Apple cake and I can eat it too. I get all the best devices, and also thanks to my politicians and the legislature and the EU regulations, regulatory bodies, I get all of like as many app stores as I want, and I get all this other stuff, and they're going to bat for me, and they're going to make sure that that's really great. Apple comes out of left field and says, oh yeah, just by the way, because you've chosen to draft this legislation in an extremely ambiguous way, and then you've told us that we have to comply with the spirit of the legislation and not the literal letter of the law, that means we don't know what you want. And so we are just going to withhold all of our best shit that we can conceivably describe as being ambiguous underneath your DMA legislation. And if that makes your constituents mad at you because you're the reason they don't get better Siri or any AI features on their phone, that sucks for you, right? So finally, Apple has, and this is why I said it's brilliant, Apple has found a way to create leverage where none would otherwise exist. I think when regulators inside of countries that operate inside countries smaller than the US, especially because the US just kind of thinks it owns the world. So we think of it as being, it may as well be global because the US is so, if not literally hegemonic, at least like only 30% of us have passports and we just don't think about the world very much. If you're a regulatory body, it's way easier to regulate a commodity, right? Like, or a fixed thing, right? If you want to regulate trains, and the definition of trains is anything that goes over tracks to transport things and people, even if it's floating above the tracks, that's also a train, right? Like you define what a train is. There's only so much, and you regulate how those trains can make money and all this sort of stuff and where they can go and so forth. You would never have a train be like, oh, well, like we're just not going to do this. It's a local, you're not, the opportunity for software, right, to redefine at the operating system level, like what this product is and what it can fundamentally do and what people are looking for from it. That's not going to come to, like a train company isn't going to be able to use some sort of, sorry, I'm not thinking of innovations in trains, but the reason I can't is because none fucking exist because this problem is so novel. what Apple's saying is like, sure, well, we're just doing our best to follow your rules. You fuckwits who can't communicate clearly. And as a result, that means, you know, some nice features you got there. It's a shame something happened to them, kind of thing. Yeah, like people are going to be pissed. People are going to write you letters and say, just drop all this DMA shit and let the like write a letter and specifically say, it's okay, Apple, you can do all the Apple Intelligence stuff you want. You don't have to worry about the assistant being pluggable, right? And part of a ballot box where you can say, I want Google Gemini or I want Apple Siri or whatever. So now I think it's going to cause real pressure. Because this is just year one. If they don't release these features, if they don't get satisfaction, if they get sued from the DMA and penalized, up until now, we've been talking like, well, will Apple just take their ball and go home? And I didn't think that they would, right? Because it's just a big enough market. Only if the fines were absolutely so usuriously high would they consider that. But this is brilliant because now they can just say, all right, EU, you're basically stuck in 2023 features for the rest of your fucking existences until you deal with this. We're going to keep releasing new stuff. AI is going to be more and more of our product stuff. All of these features that, like, you know, everyone else around the world will benefit from, you will never get until you write your parliamentarian. I don't know what the fuck we call them. Your MP, right? If they can even read and write, given how fucking just Neanderthal like a lot of the European Parliament seems to be in terms of the recent elections. Good fucking Lord. See, I can talk about this and have an opinion because it's no stakes for me. So if you're in the EU, I apologize. But this is the game, and this is like, from a strategic perspective, like they are so like Apple. These are features that people will want, but they are not, at least not now, so incredible and so category defining that Apple will lose a ton of sales on new hardware because of them. And so that's why it's not like none of these features are coming, right? They're picking out ones that they know are, not to say nice to haves, but they're not so core. They're just enough to irritate people and make them feel like they're missing out, which is exactly what you want if you want people to be frustrated and feel like they're losing something in order to get something instead of having it all be just all pluses. I knew that this was a serious volley because I clicked on the Mac Rumors version of this article and then I read the comments section. And the comments were mostly people in the UK being like, finally, Brexit pays off. And so if you got British people saying, you know, I assume the ones that are spending time on tech sites are probably on the lefter side of British politics. You got people in the UK saying like, finally, a silver lining for Brexit. Like, I don't know, EU, you done fucked up. If you're an EU leader and you make a decision, even if indirectly, results in people being thankful for Brexit, that reflects poorly on your job performance. So I thought that was fascinating. It makes me extremely excited to see new hardware products that where like Apple, maybe in the iPhone 16 Pro says, oh, sorry, that capture button. Yeah, it's going to be on the phone, but it's not going to do anything. It's not going to actually take pictures if you're in the EU because we don't want to open that up. We don't know what the rules are if we have to open up that button to third parties. So, sorry, right? It's going to be such a bummer for fans and for people who follow this stuff, or for people who like get the new phone and they, oh, what's this? Oh, it's a new button, but like when you click it in the EU, it just makes a fart sound because Apple hard coded that but if they made it actually open a camera, then they'd be potentially liable under the DMA. So but hey, if you're in Italy and you click the capture button, it makes an Italian fart sound. And if you're in Germany, you get a big juicy German fart sound. So, I mean, there's that. I normally I avoid being Euro spicy because it's not where I live. I don't know shit about fuck when it comes to Europe. So I went out on a limb there and I made a few statements. And if you disagree with those statements, please write in at podcast@searls.co and you tell me what I said wrong. And if you don't write me in, I'm just going to assume I said everything perfectly correctly. I'm looking at you. You're up. Oh, right. So version 15 of this podcast, named after an e-ink iPod Touch. So I bought it's called a Books. I think they mean for it to sound like books. I have my Books Palma right here. What a stupid name. It is, like I said, I called it an e-ink iPod Touch, but The Verge had an article I just couldn't. So David Pierce writes at The Verge. He's an editor. He does their podcasts and stuff. I find myself disagreeing with him fairly often. But I love e-ink, which I learned today is capital E space INK. And I think it just made some sound. So you might have heard a dingle from it. And I love it because it works outside in the sunshine, and I live in a place with a lot of sunshine. I also love lightweight devices, and this is just, it's a very lightweight. It feels just like I'm holding up my 15 Pro Max up against it. It is slightly larger in terms of width and height than my 15 Pro Max. So it can be held with a hand, right? But because scrolling isn't something you typically do on an e-ink screen, you can configure the volume buttons to page up and down. I'm skipping ahead. What am I doing here? I'm playing with a Books Palma, which is an e-ink Android device. It does not have a cellular radio. It's got a little SD card you probably don't need on the side. It's got a button on the left, and that button is configured by the operating system to simply do a full page refresh to unfuck up any artifacting in the display. It runs Android, so it has the Play Store installed, and I downloaded an RSS reader. I'm now realizing for the first time I don't know how to use Android. I launched the equivalent of jiggle mode, except now it's like it's trying to edit like my widgets and so forth. And I don't know how to make it stop. Go away. Just take me home. Nah. Oh. All right. Well, so now you've heard the bad news. This runs a fucking Android. But as long as you stick to just a few apps, like I've got here an RSS app, my Kindle app, which is the reason I purchased this, is I had such a hard time with Kindle hardware that now that I've got a special device that has Kindle on it. It's got RSS on it, which is nice. It's got music. Because it can run apps, I can have a browser and I can, like, because I read Japanese books for practice, I could conceivably copy paste text from the Kindle app and into a thing that would save notes or save into my word bank a word I want to learn and so forth. But it's because it's ink, it'll work outside. That's great. But because it's ink, I'm not going to be tempted to use this for anything other than reading, really. I installed Apple Music. I put up a reel on my Instagram profile of me trying to use Apple Music. And you can scroll and you can play music, but it's a little silly. Everything's a little flickery. So why am I mentioning this today? It's because here we are in this era, what I think is a renaissance of purpose-built, like less convergence device, more kind of like solves a particular set of problems narrowly, gadgets. And it's been a long drought of us not having a lot of gadgets. The gadgets that have been mostly talked about this year, like the Humane AI pin, the Rabbit R1, are focused on somehow making AI not about the phone. But like if that ever happens, we're way out, because the phone is such a powerful computer and such a massive battery and has all the connectivity, has all the information about you. Like, but there's other little gadgets too, like the Steam Deck, right? Like, and now the cornucopia of devices that run Windows poorly on in a handheld format, so you can take your PC gaming library anywhere. Like, there's just a lot of cool stuff happening in gadget land, and I'm excited personally because as I've commented on many times before, having everything in an iPhone or on an iPad within reach. Everyone can interrupt me and I can interrupt myself. It has me now where I'm at the point where I just check my iPhone at the door when I get home. I have logged into a iCloud account that is not my own on my iPad so that I can't distract myself. I shouldn't have to own 4 iPads, right? To have one that's like for work and one that's for, but that's just how my monkey brain works. And so having a phone-like form factor that can basically just be for reading and actually work outdoors. Sadly, not waterproof, merely splash resistant, whatever the fuck that means. Basically, I don't know what the IP4X maybe, or whatever. IPX4. I think the first one is dust and solid matter, and the second, and whatever. It's not waterproof. That sucks. But like, it's $279. So it's like, I bought it on Amazon. I can return it if I don't use it. But I want to cheer on little e-ink devices that aren't that capable. Because I really do feel like if Apple had never invented the iPhone, but they'd stayed in we build very good like media devices like the iPod and music, I could imagine an alternate history where they created something like the Kindle store. I mean, they've got the Apple bookstore, but it's kind of a joke. But they could have beaten Amazon to the punch and been the people who also built e-ink books, right? And this is not what that device would look like by any stretch. There is a camera, but no camera app, just a document scanning app, which I think is appropriate. But of course, you could install a camera app. If you have questions about this, I am sure there is a massive subreddit of 15 people talking a lot about their books. I'm sorry. It's capitalized in all of their marketing. I can't pronounce it. Books. BOO. Books. So anyway, check it out. I'm not going to do a formal review or anything, but apparently MKBHD did. I know he's got a smaller audience than me. So you could check out his video that reviews it. It's the reason I like it, other than it's a new device that's purpose-built that solves a problem that I have potentially. The reason I like it is I'm becoming nostalgic for the era where I had 7 different random pieces of shit in my bag when I was traveling. Have a point and shoot camera. You have your iPod. I had an electric when I was living in Japan in 2005, I guess that's what I'm thinking of. I had an electronic dictionary. I had a Nintendo DS, right, to play some games. And then I had a 12-inch iBook G4. And I don't know. Not to say any of it's awesome hardware. Not to say like sometimes physical buttons like on a game device are nice. It's there's a trilogy of movies. Is it Helvetica and then Objectified and then Urbanized or something? Helvetica about the font. Objectified is about industrial design. In the movie Objectified, in the documentary, they get Johnny Ive up there on an interview. I think it's Johnny Ive, right? Effectively saying there was this big arc of industrial design and we're adding more buttons to shit. And actually devices were getting more specific to tailored purposes. More product categories were getting created all the time as new capabilities were possible, which meant the Walkman, for example, it had physical buttons, and it might diverge from a transistor radio that just focused on being a radio, right? But then once we entered the digital realm, that curve of increasingly bespoke and vibrant and diverse hardware, it reached an inflection point and started going down, where it's like, oh, now and these were always called convergence devices. Not to say like your camera is also going to be a toaster, but your camera could be on the back of your iPod, right? And now with the smartphone being the ultimate convergence device, I don't like, am I one of those weirdos who's buying a modern day Polaroid so I can have, disposable film? No, I think that's silly. But where Johnny Ive goes with it is like effectively like the end game here is you have a piece of glass. And the end game is there's not even the glass, right? There's just a panel in front and it just does everything. And there's no buttons, there's infinite affordance and maybe no signifier physically of like what you do in the design of the thing. So that we have at least, I couldn't tell you if this is the death throes, right? Of bespoke little hardware that's just there for fun, that's does less on purpose or does one focus thing. Notice I'm not saying does that one thing better. Although I do think e-ink is superior in a lot of ways for reading books. So I don't know if it's death throes of a bygone era that's going to go away. Maybe it is, and maybe it's just propped up by how cheap currently electronics have become, especially like arbitrage with like, how much they cost to build in China specifically and then shipped over. But yeah, anyway, news item. I saw that in my news feed and then I impulse bought it and then I set it up and I liked it. So check out the books, Palma. A review that I watched that did not make me go and instantly buy something. The frog in my throat is back. Is the Windows Plus Copilot PCs. I'll never get the pacing of this right. The new Windows devices that run ARM and are called Plus Copilot because they have AI liabilities attached to them. It's supposed to be like the processor is supposed to be on par with the M3 in a lot of ways, except like to get that performance, it needs a fan and so forth. Microsoft has bragged that they have a Rosetta 2 style translation, like so to be able to run x86 software. They have a, what do you call it? Not an emulator, translate, whatever it is. Like they can run x86 stuff on ARM, and they say it's as good as Rosetta 2, and I think it's called Prism. And apparently, if you read the reviews from like people who review PCs as productivity machines, they're like, wow, this works really great. But I was skeptical that this thing would run games. Not to say I'm in the market necessarily, but as somebody who only uses Windows to play games on, I'm very interested in if Microsoft pulls off this transition, also nailing the story on, hey, and all your games are playable too, and they'll be even faster if game makers compile for ARM. And if they compile for ARM, then like doing a multi-platform port to Mac OS and iOS and Apple's platforms would be easier. It would just be better for everyone. It would use less energy and so forth, whatever. So I was curious. I watched or listened to the Digital Foundry podcast, and they tried out playing games on the Windows Plus Copilot PC. Spoiler alert. Apparently the answer is woof. It's, Richard Ledbetter, the Digital Foundry leader, main guy, I guess, said most games wouldn't even launch. The ones that did were just obnoxiously low frame rates, would only be able to be run at comically low resolutions like 720p, and even then would get a crap frame rate, or you'd have to dial down the quality settings way to the bottom. So, it might just be that these fancy Qualcomm chips are weaker GPU wise than Apple stuff. It might be that Prism isn't very good. It might be that there's software that needs to happen in terms of porting DirectX that they didn't get to yet, that they did get to the other kind of basic Win32 API stuff. I don't speak Microsoft. I'm just trying to paint a picture here. But between the fact that Microsoft pushed these things out the door with the Copilot branding, with features that they have now had to recall, they recalled recall, and all these other features, I was thinking at least if they can get the basic Windowsiness of it working. And they did do that. They did do the productivity stuff. But the fact that games were not mentioned, it would have been more, I think, confidence boosting, instilling, had Microsoft announced up front, do not buy these to play games right now. The games are a mess. We're going to, and then follow that up with, and in 6 months or in a future Windows 11 update, you're going to see improvements made specifically for games. As far as I understand, what they said was nothing, which led people to go and buy a $2,000 computer and then try to run a game on it and realize it can't play games. Not a great experience. It's just like, I realized that the head of hardware, Pennell, whatever his name is, went to Amazon recently from Microsoft. And so like maybe it's a lack of leadership, but ultimately like their messaging has just been garbage in a lot of ways when it comes to basic block and tackling press event stuff on the Windows side and the hardware side for a little while now. So don't buy a Windows Plus Copilot PC if you want to play games. And honestly, why would you buy any Windows PC over an Apple computer? My answer would be because you want to play games. So weirdly, in the Venn diagram of who I could possibly recommend a Windows PC to, all that's left is the skinny little like pie slice of people who mostly live in Excel or work in an environment where it's all Microsoft people, otherwise buy a MacBook Air. So and the Windows Surface laptop looks like such a MacBook Air ripoff that it's seriously might violate trademarks that Apple has registered. So yeah, do buy a Books Palma. Make sure you get a 30-day return. Do not buy a Windows Plus Copilot PC unless you're an accountant. Those are news because the people in media triggered these comments, but they are not recommendations because the recommendation section of the podcast has not begun yet. So let's begin it. And here we are. You might feel like no transition occurred, but I made a gesture. I did like a kind of like one of those ta-da, with my hands. Here we are. And you couldn't see that, but I hope you felt the intent. So I'd mentioned a few versions ago that Becky and I were working through 10 episode series, Dark Matter, on Apple TV. I commented that I'm not sure if it's good. It's definitely too slow. And boy, does Apple seem to really like quantum mechanic based plot devices. Well, we finally got through the season finale and it's fine. They called it a season finale and not a series finale. And that might be my biggest problem with it, because if they plan on having another season of this, and it's not an anthology, they resolved every possible thing that I had interested. There are loose ends, but that's fine. Life has loose ends. There's not like a cliffhanger that has me itching for more. But it was a competent ending to a story. What I feel when I think about that series of Dark Matter is I mentioned last time I talked about this that I'm terribly bad at predicting what's going to happen next in a show because I try to watch them uncritically. This one was so obvious I was constantly predicting exactly what would happen, as the protagonist would just spend 15 minutes kind of like Mr. Magooing from scene to scene without, really like thinking for 2 seconds like, oh yes, I am a quantum physicist. Maybe that this is related. A similar warning sign is that I hear critics, like TV critics, talk about padding in shows. Oh yeah, they really padded that out to get to 8 episodes or 9 episodes. It could have been a movie. And I'm not good at perceiving what is padding, but you could totally, it's hard to watch this show and not realize like, you know what? That pilot could have been 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe max. 4 or 5 of these episodes didn't need to happen. It became sort of like a, hey, what world are we going to get in this week? And you know what that show is called? It is called Sliders, which is a better fucking show. Sliders. Go back in time. Watch Sliders. It's probably streaming somewhere. And is it good? I don't know. And is it really regressive and backwards and so forth? Who knows? Sliders. So I really do think that this could have been a great movie. It could have been an awesome 3-hour thing. But instead it's a 8-9 hour slog. And do I recommend it? Only if you don't value your time, which, if we're going to talk about Venn diagrams, maybe that means I do recommend it. I think I might have made that joke before, but hey, I'm not going to edit this because, like I've mentioned, we don't value our time here. It's one of our shared values and principles here on the program. Something I do recommend wholeheartedly was Godzilla -1. It pains me that I liked this movie. It's on Netflix currently, at least outside of Japan. So in most territories, you can watch it for free, quote unquote, on Netflix. It pains me that I loved this movie because, first of all, I have some amount of shame, and I am genuinely like ashamed to say I liked any monster movie. You know, I meet people, but let's be honest, I meet men, but let's be honest, I meet adult boys who will refer to kaiju as a genre. Kaiju means like large monster in Japanese. And they will talk about kaiju movies, or they'll talk about how Pacific Rim was just the best movie ever and how they bombed, and like all, then they'll just, you know, I don't care. I don't care about big monsters. I don't care about big robots. They are, if your world that you're creating in a movie has a big monster or a big robot, sure. If the rest of it's good, I'm down to clown. But there are people out there who are like, I'm a big monster movie person. And so they will torment themselves with lots of Godzilla movies, right? King Kong movies. The mashups and the battles. There was just one this year, which is, I think, why the Godzilla -1 rollout and streaming was delayed, because there's a Godzilla versus Kong movie, and they it's more geared for Western audiences. So from the starting blocks, I'm a little bit embarrassed whenever I like one of these. I'm doubly sad that this was good because the Godzilla movie before this one, Shin Godzilla, was just fucking fantastic. 2017, I want to say. It was made by the feller who I think directed like was it Evangelion or something? Some really long running dramatic anime thing that I didn't watch. But like, it showed his being hired showed that they were like trying to tell a really meaningful story. And the story in Shin Godzilla is, yo dog, if Godzilla just showed up in the modern era, we would be just as fucked as we would have been 70 years ago, even with all this technology and, you know, planes that can shoot nukes at it, because of the bureaucratic mess that has become not just the modern day world, but Japan and the LDP political party specifically. And so it's a comedy of errors. It is a humorous movie. It's not a comedy. It is a Godzilla movie. Godzilla is going to go and he's going to wreck shit. But Shin Godzilla was special because the social commentary was just so sharp. It was, like, for example, there's like running gags in the movie where the protagonist, the person that we follow along throughout the movie, starts off as like a lowly nobody, like an analyst in government. And he, by continuing to make the right calls about what the Godzilla is doing or speaking truth to power about what they should be doing, they keep showing him in new scenes, and underneath his name, like they'll put up a title tag under people's names to like let you know their name and their title. His title would keep getting longer and more prominent as the film goes on. I'm not sure if this is captured in the English version, using English subs, but I thought it was hilarious that like he is rising through the ranks of bureaucracy extremely gradually as Godzilla destroys the country. But in movie adjusted terms, it's actually a meteoric rise for somebody inside of the party, right? It's very self-aware of what it is. And Shin Godzilla was really good, and they actually were working on a sequel, and then they killed it. I read, in part because they wanted to go back in time to a simpler self-contained movie that wasn't so political. And so what Godzilla -1 is, if you haven't seen it, is it takes place not after World War II, but like the first scenes are the World War II is still happening. There's several days left of World War II, and then it covers several years following. And if you're familiar with the origin story of Godzilla, it's a cautionary tale of how terrible nuclear energy or nuclear weapons are, because it's like some, you know, I don't know, some deep sea turtle or whatever the fuck gets too close to some nuclear radiation, becomes big Godzilla and kills us all, which is maybe a good message to have for a society. But like if one society needed that message, it might not have been Japan. It might have been the US, but it was reflective of that era and sort of the national trauma of the experience of the bomb. I imagine this is just stuff I've read or casually picked up. Right. So this film is really good. Onto why Godzilla -1 is good. This film is really good because it takes you back into, there's like literally, there's no spoilers. There is literally a scene where the Bikini Atoll test goes off, and then without any commentary or without educating the audience as to what's going on, like you see a flash of this Godzilla creature, like seemingly absorbing or surviving the blast. And then the next time that you see him, he's like 4 fucking times the size that he was previously. So it's an intelligent, it treats the audience like it's smart. The cinematography is great. I'm not a film critic. Like I don't normally notice this stuff, but like the color grading is like really good. Like the colors look really good in this movie throughout. The characters are all like compelling and distinct enough that you can keep track of them, even if you're, you know, just watching the subtitles, which can be a difficult thing to do for a lot of Americans watching Asian films. And the action scenes are like they're legitimate. The pacing is really good, and then the payoff at the end is all like it's such a great little blockbuster movie that I'm sure was made for a fraction of what blockbuster movies are made in America. I know it won a bunch of awards, but because it's been difficult to see once its theater window ended here in America, just want to remind you to please go watch Godzilla -1 if you have any remote interest whatsoever. It's pretty cool. Let's finally pay some attention to you, dear listener, as we visit the mailbag. Justin writes in on Delta and such. So I look at the subject and I'm like, it's either about planes or emulators of retro game consoles. Let's dig in. Oh, okay. It's about emulators. All right. So I agree. Emulators and VMs have also been the only reasons I was interested in side loading. And it's been extremely nice to have Delta, the retro game emulator that's now available in the App Store for iOS, now that Apple loosened those rules. But I miss shaders and core settings from RetroArch. This email is old enough that those weren't out yet, but yes, it sounds like the team is working on, and I can fill in the gaps. Yes, that RetroArch has come out. If it's ever released, it might just be the very least iPhone-asked iPhone app ever shipped. Justin, this is Justin from the future. Oh God, I'm looking at the timestamp. This is over a month old. Fuck, almost 2 months old. All right, please write into the mailbag, and I might have to declare mailbag bankruptcy soon. RetroArch is a front end. It does not implement. It's the kind of thing Justin would build, right? Like me, Justin. Sorry, I am not smart enough or skilled enough to write an emulator that actually pretends to be a game console and does all that hard work and the math and the, you know, low level assembly crap. I don't know what you'd even need. What the fuck? I don't. But couldn't build that. But I could build you a meta app that would just like organize all of your emulators and your ROMs and stuff and tie them together so you could launch a single app to launch all these things. That I could do. So that's what RetroArch is. Delta is also one of those. It is the Linux on the desktop of emulators, and to launch it on iOS, especially with its default theme, which just looks like complete ass. It looks like the Gentoo Linux of iPhone apps. If you don't know what Gentoo Linux is, like, download this app, look at it. Like, this is it. Literally, when you launch it, even if you switch the theme to the good theme, the one that looks like the PS3 interface, even the XMB, even if you switch to the good theme, everything else still looks like ass because the handful of graphical assets for like the icons and so forth don't even ship with the fucking app. It has to be downloaded. And I believe if you're downloading the iPhone App Store version, it will at least auto download those at some point after first launch. But originally, like when it first came out, you didn't even get that. You had to know that you had to go 5 settings deep to go to the updater and then update all of these like internal database for cheat codes and the metadata for box art to download when you add ROMs. So it's amazing that Apple let this into the App Store. I think that they had just enough. They've been in the news enough about rejecting things that they probably just let it slide because they know only extremely dedicated people are going to download it. So anyway, yes, I downloaded it. I love it. It's really good. I started playing Harvest Moon on it. I played a few other games. When I have every ROM in the world available to me and I'm scrolling through, I can never play anything for more than like 5 seconds because I won't commit, because I'll be like, oh, well, as soon as anything becomes uncomfortable, there's like, I get even a tinge of boredom, I will move on to the next thing. And then instead of playing for 10 hours on one game, I will play a grand total of 15 minutes across 20 games. And then I'll just poop out and be like, oh, this is dumb. So I'm very careful. I only drag drop, 1 or 2 ROMs at a time so that I force myself to focus through a game. Justin goes on. Have you seen the Super Metroid / A Link to the Past crossover randomizer? It's got the perfect URL, samus.link. That's SAMUS.LINK. Takes 2 of my all-time favorite games and smashes them together into one ROM, and then sprinkles items across both games in a way that every game is still possible to complete. Some doors are special, and you enter a door in one game, you exit in another. So what this means is you're on like a Zelda map. So I pulled this down. Every time you download the ROM, you get a different ROM. It's generated on the fly. And so it's like you're getting a new version of the game. You're not getting literally a new version, but like it takes all of these rooms in both games. Both games are the kind of game where you solve one room at a time. You kill all the enemies. You know where you're going to go. You go into the next room. Now, these games are old enough, Metroid and Zelda, the older Zeldas, that I don't think of them as puzzles anymore. Like you got to figure out which path to go through to get out of the game, because their maps have become so well known because people have played these games for so many decades. But when they first came out, now that I think about it for 2 seconds, you realize like, yes, these games were literal mazes. You had to just go in every direction and try stuff. And that's what I think this mashup ROM accomplishes. So you download the ROM, you beat the enemies in a room, you look around for secrets, you don't see any. Whether you're in a Metroid style room, which is a side scroller, or a top down Zelda room, you go through a door and then boom, oh fuck, I'm in the other game now and I've got shooty blasters coming at me. And I haven't beaten the game, but apparently like they make sure that the ROM is in a beatable state. Like there is a door that's going to lead to the boss that you're going to beat, and then you beat the game and you can go download a new ROM and do it again. So that's pretty fucking rad. And again, it's on the list of stuff that I couldn't do myself. But I respect it. It's the kind of thing, as you realize that we're never going to have this era of low budget, like a ton of low budget games that are just fun games, especially on mobile, because the industry got wise and figured out, oh, if we just make slot machines for kids and in-app purchases for whales, and if we just embrace the consolidation of having one big live service game kind of be our meta platform for everything, that's the way to make the most money. Like they've optimized the money making side so much that you'll never just have a bunch of little games anymore. Like, and that's, I think, with the ongoing appeal of retro games is that they are fundamentally different, because the industry can't really produce those anymore because it's really hard to justify building like standalone games that are real games. Instead, the industry's gone in this one direction. So all we really have is the oldies, right? And maybe that does something for you. Maybe you're a young person and you discovered those things, or you have a parent who showed you. I don't know whether it's going to be just limited to elder millennials forever. But the appeal of mashups like this, or going back and ROM hacking this kind of stuff at a community basis, right? Like there's always going to be independent developers who go and try to make new stuff that's evocative of that, or low budget things that are real ass games. But if you're on a phone, there's just like not that much to choose from. You got to buy one of those shell controllers, kind of wraps around your phone, which I did. And in fact, I'm constantly looking at like a newer, nicer one that might be quieter or more comfortable. Yeah. So thanks for the shout out, Justin. Thanks for the reference. That Samus.link thing is very cool. I would love to see more stuff like that. I'd love to see maybe a remixed Pokemon. I know ROM hacks aren't new, but it's unusual for them to be good. So seeing a ROM hack like this that is actually entertaining and well maintained is very impressive. Digging in one layer deeper into the sedimentary rock that is the mailbag, Sam writes, "Wait, how many HomePods do you have? Tell me about your HomeKit setup." Well, Sam, you got a mouthful of that earlier as I was describing the Homebridge menagerie. So I will just say that I don't know how many HomePods I have, and that's a problem. I'm going to do a quick count, and this is going to be super embarrassing. One on the balcony, one in the bathroom. Those are minis. I'm not going to keep track of mini versus fulls for the purposes of counting HomePods. You did not clarify in your question. 2 full-size. All the full-size ones are the new model, because the old model just fucks your network up because the hardware is so bad and the software is end of life. And so if you have an old full-size OG HomePod on your network, unplug it. Unplug it. If you're going to use it, put it on a standalone network. It will wreak havoc on everything going on in your network if you have that on there. Okay, so that's 2 full-size in the bedroom, 2 more in a pair in the loft, 1 in the gym, 2 more minis in my office. Oh, fuck. I'm well over 10, aren't I? That is the upstairs HomePods. Fuck. I'm so sorry. So sorry, Earth. I should be president of Apple at this rate. Downstairs, I have a mini in the lanai, 2 full sizes in the living room, and those are paired with an Apple TV, so they're like the theater system for the living room. 2 minis in the kitchen, which I guess would be rear speakers because it's part of the living room. It's like one big open space because that's how America works now. But that's not technically a supported thing, so they're just there. 1 in sort of like our entryway cafe area. That's 15. Fuck. 1 in Becky's office. So I would say 16, which is that shameful? Absolutely. I wanted to have one in every room. That's how we got to this point. I wanted to have one in every room so I could just say Dingus and have Dingus light up and respond to my request. Is that the reality I live in? Absolutely not. Dingus almost never wakes up. And when it does wake up, it's the wrong one waking up. And when I say the thing, it's like, oh, I can't find your iPhone on the network because it's so crowded with other fucking HomePods, you masochist. Siri doesn't say that. I turned around there to make sure I didn't just set her off. But she could say that because it's true. Now, here's the worst part about what I just said. Yeah, I have 16 HomePods that are plugged in. I still have maybe 3 OG HomePods sitting in boxes because I can't trust them on my network because they just ruin MDNS or Bonjour like protocol stuff. They just spew garbage. And because I have the fancy Unify controller, I can see the my network just go to shit in real time as all of the Wi-Fi experience degrades on whatever router or whatever access point those things connect to. So I've got like 3 of them in boxes, and because it has that effect on modern day networks, I would give them away, but I don't know who to give them to. So if you know somebody who wants an OG HomePod because they're hipsters, you let me know. Hell, hey, open offer. You listen to a 3-hour fucking podcast just now. Yeah, I feel like we're good buds. You write into podcast@searls.co and you say, I would like one of your OG HomePods. And it could be like you could say it's to listen to music. You could say, I want a footstool. You could say, I plan on snorting crack cocaine on this. Do you snort crack? Are you going to snort powder cocaine on it because it's got a little glass top? And maybe that's, maybe it's the perfect diameter for a nice juicy rail of coke. You can tell I've never used cocaine because I don't know how to talk about it. Got some frosty rails. Sniff them off a HomePod. Whatever you do, don't sniff like the speaker mesh part because like I'm sure there's a lot of toxic chemicals and metals and stuff. But sniffing off the glass on the top is probably fine. You email podcast@searls.co. Then you say, I want this HomePod. You give me your address, and if it's in the continental US and you can Apple Cash me the shipping expense, I will ship you these HomePods. They are £6. Don't expect it to be super cheap, but I will do it for you. I want them out. I don't want to throw them away because I don't know what they'll do to nature if they get thrown in a landfill. All right, here we go. Let's dig in one level deeper. It's another gaming one. Content warning, gaming. I don't remember if you talked about this before, but do you play any games on console? We've had bad luck with our consoles lately. Console as in a PlayStation or a Nintendo Switch or a Microsoft Xbox. And it's making me wonder if I need to jettison everything and get a PC for Game Pass. I expect I'd still have issues with a PC, but I'd at least be able to tinker with it more than a console. David, my friend, if you're thinking these thoughts, I think you already know the answer. Microsoft in particular, they will keep making consoles, but those are for the people who like can't or won't spend more than $400, $500 on a piece of hardware. Sony, they make dedicated hardware and games that are paired with that hardware, but they have just as of this year signaled that they're going to take pretty much all of their big games and after some sort of exclusive time period, start porting them pretty aggressively to the PC in order to try to recoup these massive investments. So the one reason you would want a console, two reasons, right? The two reasons you want a console is I want to be able to park it in front of a television, turn it on, and get to the business of playing games very quickly and conveniently. That's reason one. Reason two, traditionally, that you'd want a console is... Sorry, I had to send a text message. It's very rude. It's very rude of me. But I, as a professional, I can, of course, remember number two in the list of two things that what was I talking about? Number two reason that you'd want a console after ease of use is exclusives. You want games that are exclusive to this console. Like, hey, like Nintendo Switch still has a lot of exclusive because Nintendo has not, as discussed several times previously, they know how to make profits. So they don't have any of this compulsion to go and port their stuff to platforms that they don't own because one, their platform has a fucking insanely huge install base, but two, like they're profitable enough and their games don't cost so much that they're not so incentivized. So like if you want to play the next Zelda game, you either buy a Nintendo Switch and play it there, or you figure out how to download that Yuzu emulator that like Nintendo managed to sue out of existence to play it on a PC or a Steam Deck. That is pretty much how you play Nintendo games. So if you want to play, so reason number two, right? Like you want to play these exclusive games you can't get elsewhere. Because you mentioned Game Pass, right? Microsoft, it's been a long time, like every single Microsoft thing that they announced this summer and everything that they possibly can is going to be day and date on Game Pass and day and date PC and console. They want to maximize the availability of their stuff, and their brand promise, I think, to gamers is if you subscribe to our shit and you like live in our ecosystem, you'll be able to play this everywhere and anywhere, right? And even if 5 years from now, even if your hardware gets really old, maybe cloud streaming will enable you, right? Like they want to make it available on as many screens as possible, which means that there's no earthly reason to want an Xbox if you can afford a PC. So that's reason two, right? So exclusives are kind of going away unless you're talking about Nintendo. Reason number one, right? That this is more convenient to just park a console in front of a television. Console games, if you play them a lot, you can keep all your shit up to date, and they probably will keep working. I have found over the years, of course, that like there's more firmware updates, stuff needs huge patches. The CDNs that, for example, Sony PlayStation, when it needs to download a 15 fucking gigabyte patch, you might be talking 3, 4, 5 hours on Sony's content delivery network. And you might be talking about like 3 minutes on Steam, which has phenomenally fast distribution. That's the difference between playing the game that day and not, right? So even though the PlayStation is functionally more convenient because it's more constrained, because there's fewer knobs you can twist to fuck it up. So it's actually the less convenient experience in that way. Another way is like the controller situation, right? So like controllers, there aren't third-party controllers anymore. Everything is wireless. Everything, you can connect them, you can charge them. They all have batteries. Like it's all Bluetooth effectively. I have had more issues getting my PlayStation 5 to talk to my controller than I have had with any that I can remember. The first wireless controller that I ever used on a regular basis was probably the Nintendo GameCube Wavebird, which is a badass fucking product. I was writing for Nintendo Dojo at the time, and I did an experiment to see how long I could do it, and I went like 45 feet, and I was able to control a game from my yard through a window. So I'm not even sure, like to your point, right? If you have a problem, if you get a game breaking bug, if a save game gets corrupted, if you can't connect to your controller, which I frequently have that issue on Nintendo Switch too, where it's just like, oh, I guess Becky's controller just doesn't work, and the only one left doesn't have a D-pad that works. You have no recourse, right? Because you're operating in a sort of a walled garden in a black box. So on the PC, meanwhile, Windows has become more and more streamlined to the point where it's like Windows is the thing that I turn on my gaming PC. I grab a keyboard whose only purpose is to literally type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is my PIN code. On Windows, it's funny story. It's actually the same number that my brother uses on his luggage. We just found that out the other day. I get into Windows, I double click whatever game I'm playing because I have it on the desktop. And then I wait 30 seconds for it to open its launcher or whatever, because every publisher has their launcher because they're too good to just deliver fucking applications because there's no taste in that platform. Then you wait for the launcher to load, and then you click play again, and bingo bango, you can turn your controller on and you can play. I think that the proliferation of handheld Windows PC console things that are trying to compete with the Steam Deck, which can run Windows but runs a version of Steam OS, a Linux variant out of the box, that is going to drive Microsoft to probably have a version of Windows or a mode for Windows that can be operated strictly from boot to shutdown just with a controller. Because that's really all you have other than a software keyboard on one of these devices. They've intimated that, like Phil Spencer, the CEO of gaming at Microsoft, he's said as much on the record that like they know that they have to get better at that. So that's, the direction that Microsoft's going, right? They want everything to be on everything. They know that they have to do a better story of like PCs, at least for primarily handheld gaming uses. And if it just like, responsive web design or whatever, if you can nail the user experience for a mobile platform, that scales up. So you'd probably have that similarly simple experience at least available to you on your PC. So, hardware used to fail in PCs more often. Now things are very commoditized. And when the rare event something does fail, like the most recent hardware failure I had in a gaming PC was 2020, year of our Lord, blessed year of supply chain fuckery. I just built a PC. And the NVMe SSD, the thing that you store your games on, apparently just had some like dead bits in the middle. And I would play a game and everything would work great. But then at some point, just while playing the game, you'd get a blue screen. And it would just be a different address every time, a different error code. And I had to replace each component in that pipeline. I thought it was the graphics card at first. I went through every single component. I just did a ship of Theseus against this gaming PC to figure out, oh, it was this SSD. By the time I figured it out, everything was out of the return window, right? So that can happen. If you're building your own PC, you're going to get the best deal. Go to pcpartpicker.com. pcpartpicker.com, sponsoring this episode. It is a place where you can go and you can either use one of their builds as a starting point and then change out individual components, or you can just start a new build. That's what the vernacular is for people in the know. Start a new build and you pick out all of the components you want. Maybe like, typically you start with the graphics card that you're looking at and the main processor, and then you kind of pick out the other shit. And it'll tell you, like, the case, like it'll say, hey, this case doesn't have enough clearance for this card, right? Or this power supply isn't going to be able to power all these things. Like the web application is so fucking good that I am more confident if I get a PC part picker build that it clears all of its green checkboxes and says, you're good to go unleash the new egg Amazon, Micro Center hordes and buy all this shit and then aggregate it. And then you can have an afternoon building and putting together. Cause like at this point, like assembling a PC is like adult Legos. And it's been that way for a while, but it's more idiot proof every day. So try it out. Give it a shot, right? Worst case, you have a bad time and you return everything. Just be mindful of return windows. As you can tell from listening to the show, I'm pretty aggressive about returning shit that I'm not going to use. Because I'm cheap and because it feels like a waste. And ultimately, it is the retailer's problem if they solve returns by just throwing it in a dumpster or selling it off for pennies in bulk, right? Like, there's a better way. Not my problem. So yeah, anything else to say? I feel like I've said too much, but yeah, I just don't see, unless you only got $500 to your name. You know what? Okay. Here is when I say park in front of a television, if you want to play on a couch, have a comfy couch gaming, so to speak. That's weirdly, that is vernacular. I don't know why we decided to call it that. If you want to play from a couch and play with a controller as if it were a console, you'll either want to buy a PC with that form factor, buy a PC that's going to be quiet enough to not sound like a fucking Harrier jet, in the room, which means like, any of the top end NVIDIA cards, they sound like that. Or run a really long HDMI cable potentially, but of course, like too long and you could have issues, especially at high frame rates or at 4K. What I did was I bought an HDMI base T solution. So I've got a gaming PC here in my office that I'm looking at right now. It has an HDMI cable connected to a breakout box that's from Monoprice. And that breakout box is connected to Ethernet and power. And the Ethernet is plugged into the wall in a closed loop patch cable situation that my networking consultant did for us. And that runs up to the ceiling, through the attic, and then down to the next room over, which is our loft. The loft with the two mini HomePods. Ugh. And then there's a port in the wall there, Ethernet port. That Ethernet then runs to another breakout box, the pair of this first one as the receiver, the first one being the transmitter. And then that's got HDMI going out, and it's actually powered from the transmitter with PoE again. So there you go. What that affords me is I'm able to, all I have to do is walk to the other room to start the PC. But then I because I'm close enough to be able to use like an RF keyboard trackpad thingy from my comfy, couch area. It's as if it's a console, but it's invisible. When it's making noise, if I can hear it, that's likely a hardware problem, but sometimes I can hear it, but it's in the other room, right? It literally, like modern day graphics cards, I guess this is something to know if you haven't built a PC lately. If you're getting like a 90 tier NVIDIA card, like a 3090 or a 4090, prepare for it to make the room hot. Like, I thought, well, like I got a cooling solution, like keep it cool enough, but then it's so loud, and like take off the panels from the side when you're running something heavy duty. But then like at that point, like, damn, it's hot in here. And you realize it's just because these things are, the limit for most, what is it? Most normal plugs in the US is 1500 watts. Anything above 1500 watts, it'll trip the circuit breaker. Sufficiently powerful gaming rigs, if you're going to spend, call it $2,500 on only top tier gaming equipment, you can start to push up against like 1200 watts, right? Like we're running these things is like running one of those like Hoover vacuum cleaners from the 50s, right? They just use way too much energy. And where's that energy all go? It's like dissipates as heat. So they will make your room hotter, and that sucks. So it's not perfect, that's just the world we live in. If what you want is a cheaper experience, you can get a small form factor PC with like, let's say a graphics processor that's just spec'd similar in power to what you could get on a console. And I'm sure that now we're talking probably at this point in the console life cycle, $500, $600, $700. So, and designed to not make a bunch of noise and not dissipate a bunch of heat and sit in your credenza in front of your television or whatever. So I recommend you try it. All right, we're going to do one more and then we're going to call it. Here I said, hey, we won't be 3 hours today. And oh boy. Ross, I got some more questions for you to pick and choose from. This is a threefer. I'm going to take a sip of water. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Ross writes, delving further into the grittier side of Japanese culture, what are the toilets like? Yuck. He continues, I've heard Japan is raising the bar in the bathroom, so to speak. Oh boy. And I'm curious to know what Americans could be doing better when doing their business. Damn. Oh, Ross. All right. So what's the deal? What's the deal with airline? What's the deal with Japanese toilets? There are a couple companies in Japan that dominate the bathroom scene. Toilets, I think of Toto, because they have the famous Toto washlet bidets, and they're not the only ones that make them. Almost every toilet in every home in Japan will have a bidet, but like Toto is kind of the gold standard. When it comes to, they have what are often translated to as system baths for most homes. Bath area, so like a combined shower bath unit that's like one big plastic mold that kind of slides into almost like the cabin of a cruise ship, like slides into a particularly sized room. Because everyone in Japan has them, like, when you're building a home, like, okay, well, the bathroom's going to be exactly this by this by this, and you buy the system bath that's basically hermetically sealed. It's real easy. There's not a lot of complexity there. The best brand for that, I think, is Lixil, Lixil. Lixil? I don't know how to pronounce it. The few things at once. So one, bidets are pretty nice. I don't know. It's not like a European, just like a bidet where you're shooting the world's most boring water gun. It's a real wimpy super soaker, right? It's not like that. It's usually radio controlled, right? So like radio control of flush functionality is common. Intensity levels, the seats are usually heated. The water that it spits at you is usually heated and has a large reservoir, if not like, tankless heating that's more or less instantaneous. They have a button usually to dry your bum. In public restrooms, especially women's restrooms, there is often a button on the washlet to make a sound, like make a white noise, basically. And this provides cover fire for any women who want to poop in public. So you hit that sound, and it creates plausible deniability for anyone in the stall next to you. Was that a woman pooping? Apparently, I've heard that women are afraid to poop in public. I'm not a huge fan of it, but you gotta go. And so this is a countermeasure to encourage women or to empower women, I suppose, to take a big juicy shit at the mall by playing a sound. I've seen them with just a sound button. I've seen one. I remember seeing one that had like nature sounds, rain sounds, and so forth, like different sounds that it could make. And I've seen one where you can slide the volume up and down just like you can with the intensity of the bidet spray. So it's just better living through chemistry right there. Other bathroom notes of note. I just remodeled a bathroom. It cost a fuckload of money, way more. It was because of a structural issue in the bathroom as we moved into the house. So we knew it was causing damage to the wood and so forth. And so like that was how we got down the slippery slope of blowing 40 grand on bathroom remodel stuff. Turns out like that's just like if you're doing a bathroom in the US and it's like bigger than a bread box and you can't just do one of those like bath fitter solutions, shit adds up pretty fast between, anyway. The system bath in Japan is appealing because it is like the bath fitter. If you ever see an ad for like, get a new bath in a day, like that's what we're talking about. You slide it in and instead of going over like some old bathtub and then mapping up the plumbing, the whole bath is like one unit. It all works in concert. And so that means that you can have an electric panel on the outside of the bathroom, which is a wet room, right? An electronic panel on the outside of the bathroom. Maybe you have a second one that's controlled by radio in the kitchen. And we had one in our home in Nara when we lived there in 2019. I miss it all the time. Becky's a bath person. When Becky was winding down for the night, I, as the house husband, could, from the bathroom while I was cleaning dishes, hit a button, start filling the tub from the kitchen. Say, all right, it's tub time. They'll remember that like she likes it at 41 degrees Celsius. It'll know the set point of how deep to fill the bath. So not only will these things be able to remotely start filling a bath, set the temperature, set the fill level. Let's say it cools off. You can hit a button to keep it at that temperature, right? So like the default mode or mode I would always have it set is like, please keep the temperature up, right? Don't let it just cool down. You go to the bath. If you want to look at like how it's not like normal faucets. It's not like you have servos, like twisting knobs. You go to the bath. I'm so glad to be sharing this because this is like the fucking best thing about Japan. People don't tend to know about it. You go into the bath and you see like a hockey puck sort of thing. You see like a wall wart. It's not at the bottom per se, but it's like low. It's at a lower level. It's definitely below sea level. Like no matter how high you like your bath, this is lower than that. And the reason is this little filter looking thing, there's no controls on it because it doesn't need to be, because that's what the electronic console is for. This is where your water comes and goes from. So if you're filling the tub, it'll spew from there. And because it's under the surface, it's measuring the pressure. So if you got like a fancy Apple Watch Ultra, you can go underwater and it'll tell you how deep underwater you are. It uses the same basic thing because with the system bath, it knows exactly how deep the tub is. So it can know based on its position. I figured this all out backwards, so I might be wrong about some of this, but as far as I can tell, it figures out how deep the current water level is by knowing that I am always going to be 8 centimeters or 4 centimeters off the bottom of this tub. And so that means if I'm experiencing this amount of pressure, that means that I've got 6 centimeters of water above me. And so that means a grand total, and it does the math, right? This is all internal to the firmware of these devices. And so that means that if pressure is X, it knows the height of the tub is Y. And so I, from my panel in the kitchen, can click an up arrow and it'll increase by a centimeter the height of the water and keep it there and keep it recirculating heat because it's also got temperature sensors in it. And when it's time to drain, I can click a thing and it'll drain it. Tell me that ain't fucking rad, right? Like try doing what I just did, going into Ferguson, the luxury bathroom showroom that serves all the stars, like in the US, and say, find me on the market something that will autofill a tub. And they've got fillers, but none that will know when to stop filling. So it's like you're basically paying for a future spill. Tell me something that will keep the tub hot. And they've got these things now. You can pay for a fancy option in a big tub, and it'll have like little air holes that it looks like, and like stuff happens. I don't know. Like it's like the air holes like circulate something. I think it's electric. I don't get it, but to try to maintain some of the heat so it cools off less quickly, but like couldn't bring it up to temp. Could never increase the temperature of the water. At least so I'm told. Certainly nothing that would automatically like if you can't stop filling right when it starts, like it can't know it's full. It can't know how full it is. You can't say increase or decrease the fullness. And like almost none of these come with any smart features, any ability to control it remotely. It's just like what you're paying for is a panel that's going to be like 3 feet away from the tub. And at that point, just turn the fucking nozzle. Right. So I was super excited to look into, since we had to do this bathroom remodel, how can I get this Japanese wonderful bathroom in America? The answer is Lixil. I don't know how they don't sell shit in the US really. What I could import would be like their standalone stuff, which has limitations relative to what the system baths typically do. There is a company I found in San Francisco that does these system baths for what one presumes are Japanese Americans who would like a nice bathroom here. They didn't return my emails when I was like, hey, is this something that like I could conceivably buy in Central Florida? For me to get one of these things, my plumber's a friend of mine, John, he's great. For me to get one of these, I would strain our relationship by saying, John, we're going to sit down and like, I'm going to translate this install guide for you. We're going to do all of the metric to imperial measurement conversions. We're going to find out if the drain fits an American drain. We don't know. And then we're going to plug it all together. And after we do, and this is imagining a world where I found a way to import this tub or ship it internationally and pay customs on it. If we figure all that out and get it working, well, first of all, the value of my house just went down because the panel system is a liability. It's complexity. It's confusing to people. It's only available in Japanese. So I'd have to like print out little labels for people to understand. You just don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the outlier or the weirdo, right? You can imagine having trouble to sell a home because the bathroom is so fucking weird that then you end up spending more money to undo it in order to sell the house. But more pressing is if anything goes wrong at any point, it's 100% on me. Like this company isn't going to be able to provide warranty service to me overseas. And yeah, I couldn't sign up for it. So to answer your question, Ross, yes, Japan raised the bar in the bathroom, and then they hoarded it. They kept it to themselves. In fact, Toto, which you might know because Toto USA, their subsidiary, sells a lot of Toto toilets, fancy egg-shaped toilets, as well as washlets and so forth, the bidet systems and stuff. They sell a bunch in America, but like they're not sending their best. They are, first of all, no longer, as far as I know, I don't think Toto USA anymore actually imports into the US from Japan manufactured products, which are all very high quality. Instead, I believe that they're all being constructed in Mexico by yet another subsidiary or contract partner. And so like, again, friend / plumber John like bought one of the really fanciest Toto USA toilets, and the paint's peeling and like it can't flush when the power goes out, which is obscene to me and not true ever in Japan, although the power is rarely going out. But still, like, I don't know why. I think that you want to start a trade war with China. You want to set 5% tariffs. You, the politicians out there. The real thing that we need as a nation is to coerce our friends and allies in Japan to give us the good toilets, to give us the good bathtubs. That's all I want. You run on that platform, you got my vote. So, Ross, I'll get to your other questions later. I think that's That'll probably do us. Thanks everyone for the time. The time isn't the time that you spent with me today here, Sunday, June 30th. It is now 4 p.m. Fuck. I got places to be. And now, thanks to the magic of this firmware update that provides loopback functionality, I'm looking at my Stream Deck and I see a little logo of the Breaking Change logo on a square button, and it says intro, outro, and I'm going to click it. And after I click it, it's going to play the music, and then the podcast is going to end. So here goes nothing.